everyone, and welcome to this project video on Next.js. So the idea is for us to know the features that we have in Next.js, how Next.js differs from React.js, and we have this project that we are going to use to learn about the features of Next.js. So we're going to make use of Next.js, we're going to have TypeScript, and then we're going to have Sanity.io, which is a headless CMS, and we're going to put all this together to build a blog application. So the idea isn't the end product of what we are building. The idea is for us to learn about Next.js and the awesome features that it has. So we're going to see the client-side rendering and also server-side rendering in Next.js. We're also going to see the pages folder in Next.js and how we can handle routing in our Next.js project and the big difference that it has in React.js. We're also going to see how to make use of the API folder that we have in Next.js, and this is what actually makes Next.js a full stack framework, because we can at the end of the day have a server-side code run in our front end. We don't need to create a separate Node.js project to have this functionality. So this is the project that we are going to be building, and before we get started with the project, I just want to say that please do go on and subscribe to the channel. It helps the channel and it helps more people to know about the content that we're doing here. So if you also like the tutorial, do go on and smash the thumbs up button. I really do appreciate, and let's get started with learning about Next.js. Hello everyone, so let's get started learning Next.js. I'm in the official documentation of Next.js, so nextjs.org, and as we can see here, Next.js is the React framework for the web. Okay, and with Next.js we are able to create full stack web applications. Okay, and we do this by extending the features that we get from React.js, and also you see Next.js comes with an integration with a Rust-based JavaScript tooling, which helps for fast builds. Okay, and let's come over to the docs section, also in the navigation over here, and in the basic features navigation, or if we scroll down to where we have TypeScript, we can see the command to execute on our terminal to create a new Next.js application with TypeScript. So this is the command npx create next app at latest --ts. So I'm going to copy this command and I would go over to the terminal. Let's create our Next.js application. So over in my terminal, I am going to navigate to a directory where I would like to create this Next.js application. So I'll cd to my desktop directory, and I'm going to paste the command that we just saw in the Next.js documentation. So npx create next app at latest --ts. We're going to execute this command, and we're going to have some couple of questions that the next CLI is going to ask us. So let's see. It asks us what is the name of the project. I'm going to go with Next.js tutorial. So you can name this whatever you'd like in your system, on your device. I'm going to execute. It asks us if we would like to use ESLint with this project. I'm going to say yes. Tailwind CSS for styling, I would also say yes. You can go with no if you have your preferred styling library. In this case, I will just go with Tailwind CSS so that we don't bother much on the styling. And it also asks us if we would like to use the source directory. I would also say yes. And basically, I'm going to explain this in depth. Now, Next.js also comes with an experimental app directory. I would say no because it's still experimental. And what import alias would you like to be configured? I'll just hit enter to use the @/ and this is good when we are importing our components in our pages directory, as you would see when we progress with the tutorial. And we hit enter. So I'm using npm, and this is going to create a Next.js application using this template, so default -tw, and we can see the dependencies that comes along with it. So we have React DOM, Next, TypeScript, the types for React, the types for Node, the types for React DOM. We also have Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, Auto Prefixer, ESLint, and ESLint config Next.js. So This is going to take a while. I will fast forward and be back once the next CLI has been able to generate a next application for us. I'll see you. Alright, so the Nextjs CLI has successfully generated a new Next.js application for us. I'm going to cd into the created application. We called it I called it Next.js tutorial, and I'm going to open it with Visual Studio Code, and the shortcut for this is using the code period or code.command and execute. So here we have it, a new Next.js application, and we have some files and some directories that comes automatically with this. I'm going to walk us through. And if you're coming from a React background, hopefully you are, these files and folders, at least most of them should be looking familiar. But we have the node modules. So the node modules we know comes from having to run npm install, installing the dependencies that we have in our package.json. But then we have the public directory, and the public folder just contains all public assets. So static assets such as images, fonts, and other files, that can be served directly to the browser, and it doesn't need further processing. So we just store static assets in the public folder. We have the source folder, and typically the source folder is used to store our source code. So it stores our source code for our Next.js application. And here we can see it contains other subdirectories. In this case, we have our pages and we also have our styles. So let's go first with our pages folder. So this pages directory contains all the pages, which is something that differs from a React.js application, because in a React.js application, we would have something like routing. Let's say using a routing library like React Router, we would have to configure our routes in our app directory. But in this case, we have our pages, and this index.tsx over here represents the entry point of our application. That means our root page, which is localhost 3000. This is our home page, which is the index page. And this is one area that Next.js differs from React.js. We also have our underscore document TSX, and this underscore document TSX is a special Next.js component, and it is used to customize the HTML document that is being rendered by our application. In this case, you're saying that it is customizing the lang, changing it, making it en by default. Also the header tag, we have the main, and we have next scripts. Okay, and we can use this component to add consume method tags or analytics scripts or other HTML elements that are not included by default. And then we have our underscore app tsx, and this is also a special Next.js component, and it acts as the root component for all the pages that we have in our application. So we see that we are adding, or tailwind CSS is being imported here to add global stars to all our pages. And we have our props, app props, which is also passed to our pages, which is being returned in this case as components. And we have the page props that is being passed down as props to these components. So that is it for these files. And we also have an API directory over here. And in here we have a hello.ts, and this hello.ts is an example of the full stack feature that we have in Next.js. So this is an example. The hello.ts is an example of an API endpoint that we can use to fetch data from a server. Okay, and in this case we are seeing it has, or it sends back a dummy response of 200 with a JSON data with a name of John Doe. Okay, so an API, any API request coming to /API hello.ts, this file is going to be called, and this response is going to be returned. So that's what we have for our pages folder. This is a folder that we will be working a lot in this course module, as you can imagine. And here we have our styles, which is self-explanatory. This is where our styles live. And because we told Next.js to build our application with Tailwind CSS, we already see that we have the Tailwind base components and utilities being imported into these global styles, and we have other styling that we would be editing as we continue with this course. And that's it for our source folder. We have the ESLint, which is just for ESLinting. We have gitignore for version management. We have the next env.d.ts. So this file is automatically generated, and it just provides TypeScript definitions for our Next.js runtime. So it provides TypeScript definitions for our Next.js runtime. That's all that this file does. We have our Next.js config, and in our Next.js config is where we provide application configuration for our Next.js application. Package.log just logs the versions that we have in our package.json, so that whenever we run npm install, we can go on to install the same version as we had. We have our post.csn config, which is where we do more tailwind configuration. We have our readme for documentation purposes. We have our tailwind config for tailwind configurations. We have our tsconfig.json, and tsconfig for JSON is a configuration file for TypeScript, and this is just used to add various TypeScript settings. As you can see, it just adds the target version for JavaScript and other configurations over here. So this is it for the application build, what we have going on in our application. In the coming videos, we are going to see how we can configure this application to our needs. We are going to first off start configuring the fonts that we will be using in our project. So I'll see you in the next video. Alright, so let's add Google Fonts to our Next.js application. And for that, we'll be making use of the Next Font library. So I'm back to the official documentation in the basic features nav over here, and where we have font optimization, we see that the Next Font will automatically optimize our fonts. So it includes built-in automatic self-hosting. And the Next Font library is able to achieve this because all CSS and font files are downloaded at build time. So you see over here that no requests are sent to Google by your browser. So if you scroll below, you would see some sample code on how we can make use of this Next Font library. And we see that in our pages_app.js, you import the fonts of choice, in this case, Inter, and you pass some configuration and you wrap around your main component. This is one approach. I don't really like this approach because you see over here, you would have to wrap your component in this main tag. So if we scroll below, you would see another approach that we can use by injecting the font in the head tag. And this is it over here. So we have this style tag over here, and we inject the font family and we inject the font. So let's see how this works in code. I'm back to our project and where we left off. So if you come over to your sources, pages, and _app.tsx, let's go on and import the font of choice. So in this case, we'll be using Poppins, and Poppins should be imported from Next Font Google. So we're going to save it in a Poppins constant, which is going to be equal to the import that we have. So we pass some configurations to it. First configuration we'll pass is the subset, which is an array of string. In this case, we'll pass Latin. Also, we're going to pass the font weight, and font weight we're going to be making use of in this project is 400, 600, and also 700. Okay, so let me fix this error we have over here. You can also pass the style, so we're going to pass style, and it's also an array of string, and we're going to pass italic and also normal font. And lastly, we need to give this font a variable, and we're going to make use of this variable in our tailwind config so that we can use this variable in our JSX. You'll see how it works in a second. So we're going to call variable, and the variable we're going to give to this font is font, and then we go Poppins like this. So this is one way. And rather than, as we saw, wrap this in the main tag, I'm going to cut this and we are going to return a fragment and I'll paste. So in here we're going to make use of the style tag, and in this style tag it needs two configuration. One is JSX and the other is global. Okay, and here we're going to pass curly brackets and string interpolation. We're going to write HTML inside here, and this HTML we're going to pass the font family, which is going to be equal to, and then we're going to inject poppins, and then style, and then font family, like this. So this is it, at least for the first step. What about when, let's say, a situation whereby you want to use multiple fonts? In this case, let's say we also want to use Montserrat, like this. You can go on and import the font of choice, and I'll just duplicate this, and here we pass Montserrat, and here as well we also use Montserrat. So this is it, and we can come over here, we add a comma, so I'm just going to copy this, and you can add a comma, and here we pass Montserrat. So our default font is going to be Poppins, and then we also have Montserrat. If you want Montserrat to be the default font, you pass it as the first property over here. So let's save it, and one thing we need to change is this for Montserrat. So font Montserrat for the variable name. Then we come over to our tailwind config, and I'm just going to collapse this. So in here we need to import font family. So we need to import font family, and this is being imported using the require method, and here we call tailwind css, and then / default theme. Okay, we have an error. That is because, let's see, this is meant to be const, not import, so this is meant to be const. Okay, now we have the font family. We need to extend, so we're going to extend font family, and we're going to pass this configuration to this, and the configuration we're going to pass is poppins, and the value needs to match this variable that we have over here, so font poppins. I'm going to copy this, I'll come back here, and we pass variable and then font poppins, like this. So one other thing we need to do, we need to spread out the font family that we imported, and then sans, like this. So we can go on to duplicate this and change this to, let's bring over here Montserrat. So we change this to Montserrat, and also change this to Montserrat. So let's see how we can make use of these fonts in our application. By default, Poppins is our default font. We can come to our home page, which is found in this index.tsx. And here, let's say we want to use our own fonts. You see over here there is in inter, so I'm just going to take this off, and let's pass in font, and then you see we have font Poppins and we have font Montserrat. Okay, so these are referencing our variables, as you can see. So by default we're using font Poppins, but if you want to use Montserrat in some sections of your application, you can come over here and choose Montserrat. Okay, so let's go with Montserrat, although Poppins is our font of choice, just to give you an idea on how it works. So if you want to get auto completion from Tailwind CSS, you can come to the extensions marketplace and search for Tailwind CSS. So you search for Tailwind, and you see over here Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. Do go on and install, and this is good to give you some highlights and also auto completion as you work with Tailwind CSS. Let's go on and restart the application by running not npm start. We need to run npm run dev. Okay, and this is going to start our Nextjs application on localhost 3000. And if you visit localhost 3000, it's going to take a while to load. And let's see the fonts that we have applied. So we can come over here, and if we try to inspect any of these fonts, we see, let's see, we see over here we're using Poppins. Over here we're still using the default font, but let's come back to our browser and let's maybe it must have been hard coded somewhere. Let's get rid of these and let's return a div, just a div with the text hello, and let's see the font that it comes with. So we visit this, you see that it uses our font Poppins. Okay, so this is it. We have some default styling over here that we can fix if we come over to our styles global.css, and in here let's just get rid of these classes that we have here, and let's save and visit our application, and here we have hello. So if we visit, you see that we have Poppins as our default font, and we can also come here and we can specify to use font Montserrat. And if we save and go back to the browser, we see that we are using, let's reload, we see that we're using Montserrat as our font. Okay, so as you can see here, the font family is Montserrat. So that's it, and that's how you can use Google Fonts in your Next.js application. Let's continue in the next lectures and learn about Next.js. Alright, so let's go on and continue learning about Next.js. So I would like us to create a layout component, and basically this layout component is going to be a wrapper in our pages, so in the entire page that we have. And typically in your application, this layout would be a header and also a footer. So I'm going to come over to our root directory, and I'm going to create a new component called components. And basically I'm actually going to move this inside our source folder. Okay, and here in our components, I'm going to create a layout.tsx file, and I'm also going to create a layout directory, and I'll move this inside here. So this is going to be our layout, and for now the JSX is just going to be something like this, where we would just return and then return words. So in this case, I would like to return props children. Okay, so how do we do this? We say this layout is going to be of type FC, and FC has to be imported from React. Okay, and FC stands for function component. Okay, and as you see, FC is a generic type. If you just hover on this, you can see it's a generic type of the props that this component is expected to receive. Okay, so here we can have a generic type, and let's create a type for this layout component. I'm going to say it's an interface, and we can call this layout props, and this is going to take in the children like this, and this children is going to be of type React node, and React node also has to be imported from React. And then we take this layout props that we define over here, and we pass it to this functional component. So over here we're going to receive props, and we can destructure the children from the props. So we can say const, and here we destructure children. Okay, so what do we return here? For now we can just return these children, but actually I would like these children to be inside a main tag. So we're going to have this main tag, and here we are going to return children. For some basic styling, I'm going to give this some class names. So one, I'm going to go with a min height of string. So let's save this, and let's go on and make use of this layout component. Okay, so to make use of this layout component, I'm going to come to our pages, and over here where we have our underscore app tsx, so rather than return component like this, I'm going to cut this, and in here we are going to have our layout. Okay, so we don't get the import because we are not exporting, so we need to export this layout. So let's go on and export default layout so that we can import it in our app tsx. So I'm just going to hold command period, and you can see the import is going to come from @ and then our component folder as we configured earlier. So this is it. I'm going to bring it down here and some spacing. So let's go on and save, and if we come to our layouts, I'm just going to cover all of this. You can see that we are going to have this main with this minimum height and then return children. So let's go to our browser and let's reload. We don't see any change, but if we inspect the JSX, we should see this wrapped in a main layout. So this main layout with this minimum height is coming from our layout component. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to configure our tailwind config so that we can have some class names, some colors that we are going to be using throughout our application. Okay, so let's go on and configure tailwind CSS. So I'm just going to collapse this and also collapse this. So here where we have background image, I'm going to remove all these that we have over here. And for background image, we are going to define our own gradient. So I'm going to have one key, which I would call primary gradient like this. And the value is going to be equal to this string. Okay, so this string is linear gradient, and it has these values. Okay, this is just a tailwind CSS, way of defining linear gradients. Okay, so let's also go on and have our own colors. So we're going to have our primary color. In this primary color, we're going to have an object where we can have our light color, and the value is going to be hash. So FCC182, and we're going to have the default color. So default, this is how we define the default color, and we'll go with hash FA9021, and then we can have a dark variant, so a dark color, which would go with hash AF5B04. So this is how we can customize different colors. So we can use color primary, and if we don't specify any value, we are going to make use of the default. Color primary light would make use of this, and color primary dark. We would see how we can make use of these as we progress in the course. So we can save this. And if we come back to our layout component, and here where we have this minimum height, we want to make use of, I'll just close this, of this as our color. So this primary gradient. So what we can do, we can come here and we can say BG, and then we go with primary, and then you see that we have light, but now we need the gradient, which is going to go with this property. So background image, and you can see the value as we specified. So I'm going to save this, and let's go back to application, and then you see we have this layout. Okay, we can no longer see our text, but it's there. Alright, so this is how you configure Tailwind CSS, and if you want to make use of these classes that we define, so this light, default, and dark, you can just come here and say text and then primary, and then you see primary light, primary, or primary dark, and this references primary light, primary dark, and the default, if you don't specify, is going to be this value over here. Alright, so that's it. We have been able to have a layout component and also configure Tailwind CSS. Let's continue and let's go on and create our own header component. Alright, so let's have our own header component. I'm going to come over to this components directory we have, and I'm going to create a header folder, and in here I'm going to have a header .tsx file. And in this header.tsx, let's go on and lay out the component is going to be equal to an arrow function where we would return, for now we'll just return empty fragments, okay? And let's not forget to export this as the default, so export default header. Alright, so for the classes, I have already predefined some classes that I have in a JavaScript object. So here I would call this header class names.tsx, and I'm going to paste these classes over here. So we have these header class names, which are just tailwind CSS classes. So I'm trying to save us some time so we don't have to start typing out these class names. I would obviously make this available in the course resources. So this just contains some classes for the different HTML tags that we would have in our header component, and I'm also exporting this as the default. Now this will enable us to import the header class names from the header class name directory, and here before we return, I'm just going to destructure the class names that we have in our header class names like this. So this consists of, let's see, we have an error. So this consists of contactors, container, header, li, we also have a link, logo container, nav, and also URL, okay? And here we are going to return our header, and this header is going to have a class name. So this is going to have a class name of header, and inside this header we are going to have a div, and this div, is going to have a class name of container like this, okay? So now we need a link, and in order for us to use a link in Next.js, we are going to be making use of the next link, okay? So I'm going to import link, and this link is going to be coming from next link. If you're using Visual Studio Code as your code editor, you can hold Control or Command and click on this link that we have just to see some documentation in Visual Studio Code. And for props, or the properties that this link component takes, you see it takes in a href prop, and this href is of type URL, and this URL can be a string or could be an object, okay? So if we click on this, you can see that it can be an object with all these properties. So with auth, hash, hostname, href, and all these properties. You can see it also takes as, and here you have the description of what all these properties do. So you see this as is an optional decorator for the path that will be shown in the URL, in the browser URL bar. You can see it also has this replace, scroll, and some other props, okay? But for now, we are going to be using the link, and we're going to use it as this. So we're going to have this link, and this link obviously needs a href, and this href is just going to be for our home page. So we're going to configure it to go to the slash or path slash like this. Okay, and inside this link, we are going to have a h1 that we would call home. Rather home, we call logo, and I'll just change this to be a h3. And this link, we are going to give it a class name, and this class name is going to be logo container. Okay, so this is for our logo, and then we are going to have our nav just outside this link we have. So we're going to have our nav, and our nav is also going to have a class name of nav, not name, so nav. And in here, we're going to have an unordered list, which is also going to have a class name of UL. And inside the UL, we're going to have a list item, which is going to have a class name of li, okay? So inside this list item, we are going to have more links. So I'm just going to copy this, and this is going to link to our home page, okay? And we can just write home. I'm going to duplicate this a couple of times, and here we're going to have another link to go to about us. So we can just do like this. So about us, and the href of this link is going to be to slash about, and we can also have a shop link, and here we can have a href that goes to slash shop. We can also have a link to our blog, and here we can go to slash blog. And lastly, we can have another list item that is going to go to the contact us page, and here we're going to go to slash contact. And for class name, we can change this to, let's see, this link is going to have a class name, sorry, not logo container, is going to have a class name of link, okay? Yeah, so that's it. But for this, we're going to give it a class name of contact us. All right, so let's save what we have. And if we go back to the browser, we don't see anything. That's because we are not making use of this header component. We are not using the logo, and the logo is meant to be used over here. So we are going to give it a class name of logo like this. So we're going to import this, our header component, inside our layout component. So rather than return just children, we are also, in this our main tag, we are going to have our header component. So okay, so this is our header component, and next we are going to be having our footer component just here. So every component, if you come over to your underscore app, you see that we just wrap everything, our entire page, in the layout component, and this entire page represents children. So I'm just going to split this. If you come to the layout, this entire component that we have here, which represents our pages, is what we have here as children. So before we return, or where we return the entire page, we are also going to have a header, and in the next video we are going to have the footer component. So if we save this and we come back to the browser, now we see we have our logo, our home, about us, our shop, and a contact us. Now the styles look broken, and let's see how we can fix this. So here we have our header, we have a container, we have our logo container, we have our nav, okay, we have our unordered list, and here we have our list item, and each list item has a class name of li, and this link has a class name of link, okay, and this link should have a class name of, logo container. Okay, so we're going to have logo container here. Here we have our logo. Here we have our logo with the logo container. Here we have our nav, ul, li. Okay, and here we have a link with the class name of link. And here we have our home, which has a class name of, I think we made a mistake by wrapping everything inside this h3. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to take this off from here. So we don't need to wrap all of these inside the h3. So we just have this for our home, and I'm going to remove all of these that we had earlier. So If we save this and we go back to the browser, yes, everything works perfectly this time around. So you see how we can have a layout component which wraps our entire page. In the next video, we are going to have our footer component. So I'll see you in the next video. Alright, welcome back. Let's go on and have our footer component. So here in our components directory, I'm going to have another folder which I will call footer. And here we're going to have our footer class names .ts, okay? And we're also going to have our footer.tsx. And here for our footer class names, I'm just going to paste the class names we have for our footer component. And here in our footer JSX is going to be an arrow function. And in here, we are going to return some JSX. So let's not forget, and let's go on and export this footer as the default, okay? And here we have our footer component. We are going to import it in our layout. So here we are going to make use of our footer component like this. We have an error, and that's because, let's see, we are just returning nothing, okay? So let's fix this error, and let's come over here and let's destructure from our footer class names, okay? So our footer class names, which is this file that we have all these tailwind CSS class names. Alright, so from here, let me quickly bring in the different class names that we have, okay? So these are our different footer class names. So rather than return nothing, we are going to be returning this JSX that we have over here. So we're going to be returning this JSX, okay? So I just want to save us some time from laying out this JSX, but if we see what's going on here, we have our footer, which has this class name, and inside we have this div, which also has this class name. And if you open this div, you can see that we have our footer. These are just static data. So we have another section, and if you open it up, you can see the different sections that we have over here with some dummy text, okay? So I'm going to save this, and let's come back to the browser, and if we scroll down, we can see our footer components, okay? So what this means is that any page that we have in our pages folder, so any page that we define in this pages folder is always going to have the header and also the footer, okay? So in the next video, we are going to start working on building our blog page. For now, these are all static data. And then once we are done with the static data of this blog page, we are going to go into the interesting part and where we can enjoy the features that Next.js offers. Alright, welcome back to the application. And for now, we just have this going on. Okay, so we're able to work on our header navigation. We have these different links in the application. But let's say we want to visit the blog page, that's the blog route. If we click on /blog, you see that we go to a 404 page. So let's see how routing actually works in Next.js. Back to our application where we left out, I'm just going to close all the tabs we have here. And earlier in the course, I said that the pages folder is a special folder where we handle routing in Next.js. And over here, you can see that we have already walked us through the _app.tsx, which is a file that we've worked on earlier in the course. And we already know the work of this _documents. But I said the index.tsx is our home page, and that's why we have hello on the screen. I'm just going to remove this font over here. So if we, in this case, if we are trying to go to the blog page, in order for us to set up routing, we would come to our pages folder and we are going to define a file that we would call blog.tsx. So in this case, I'm just going to quickly lay out a blog JSX, which is going to be an arrow function. Here I'll just return h1 that says blog page. And you also need to export default blog. Okay. So requests coming to our domain, in this case localhost 3000/blog, is going to come to this blog page. So if we go back to the browser, we don't see anything. For one, we don't see the 404 error we had earlier, and we don't see the blog because it's somewhere here. So over here we have the blog page. If I use the developer tools and we inspect, we can see that somewhere here we have the blog page on the screen. So this is one way that we can handle routing in Next.js. And interestingly, let's say we want to visit localhost 3000/blog and let's say a slug of 1. How do we handle navigation in this aspect? So in the pages folder, another way of handling navigation is by creating a directory that we would call blog. Now, any route coming to localhost 3000/blog is going to come into this directory that we have here. Okay, so now I'm going to move this into this blog route that we have. And if we go back to the screen, you might be expecting to still see this page loaded, but we are going to get an error. So if I go back to the screen, we see we are back to 404. Interestingly, if I should go to localhost 3000/blog, and I go to /blog, we see that the 404 error is gone and we have the blog page somewhere on the screen. And that's because if you want to use this special way of handling or arranging your routes in the pages directory, this blog has to change from blog.tsx to index.tsx. So localhost 3000/blog is going to load this index page, which is more like the home page for this blog folder, this blog directory that we have over here. So if we go back to our application, we see 404 because we are on /blog/blog, which no longer exists as we changed this route name to index.tsx. So if we should go back to /blog, you can see that we correctly load the blog page. And now for the slug, in order for us to load the slug, in this case, we can go to, so now we can use a file, and in this case, like this, we go with slug like this .tsx. Okay, so I'll quickly copy what we have here, and I'll just call this blog item, and I would export this as default and name this the blog item page. So if I go on and I save this and come back to the browser and I visit /blog, and let's say we have a slug of 1, you would see that in this case we load, let's see, using the developer tools, we load the blog item page. Okay, so this is how we handle routing in our Next.js application. And you can go on to create other pages, so other routes that we have for in our application. So for the about us, for the shop, contact us route, just for practice. But in general, this is how routing works in Next.js. So we have been able to see how we can navigate in application using the pages folder. And let's go back to lay out the JSX for our blog page. And in order for us to do this, we would have to create 2 new components. So I'll come over to the components folder and I'll create a blog category card.tsx. And in here, I'm just going to rename so I can copy. This is not .tsx. And here I'm going to create the file which has the .tsx extension. And for the JSX, we have the block category card, which is going to be an arrow function. And in here, we are going to be returning the link component. So go on and import the link component from next link. And in here, we are going to have some class names. So what's going to happen is I'm just going to bring in some of the class names that this component is going to be making use of. Okay, so these class names we are going to be using or referencing inside this JSX. And for the block category card, we can come over here and say that this component is of type FC, that is a functional component. And for the props of this component, I'm just going to paste in the interface of this component over here. So we expect this category card props to have an image, also a name, which is a string, a slug, and some description. So I'm going to pass the reference over here and say this functional component is going to be of this type. And here we can receive props. So what's going to happen is I'm going to destructure all of these properties from the props. So that is the image, name, slug, and also description. So this link, the href of this link is going to be pointing to /blog and /, then we're going to inject the slug. Okay, so remember that routes in our application that goes to /blog and /any random slug is going to be coming over to this link over here. That's to this route. And this route for now, we just have this dummy data. Okay, so this is it for here. And next, we are going to have another div. So I'm just going to paste in this div here. And this div has this class name, so which is .category card, which is referencing this tailwind CSS class names over here. And next, we are going to be making use of the next image. So let me import this the next image from next/image. And this next image, if I should hold command or control and click on this, we have an internal documentation in Visual Studio Code, and we see the properties that this next image takes. Okay, so it takes in the source, alt. So these two are not optional, so that's why we don't have the question mark parameter here. It takes in an optional height and width and fill, loader, and all these other properties. And then you can see some deprecated properties that you will be able to use before now. Okay, and this next image comes with image optimization, which is not something we get out of the box using a regular img tag. Okay, and here we pass this width and height that matches the image, or you think matches closely to the image that is going to be rendered by this component. So here we have the image, and after the image we are going to be having a h3 for the name of the category. So I'm just going to paste in this h3, and we have the name, and after the name we are going to have the description. So here we have the description, which is the description that we get from props, and then we slice to take the first 100 characters, and then we add ... at the end. Okay, so I'm going to save this category card, and coming back to our blog page, first I'm going to take this off so that I'll have a function with the return keyword. And first we are going to return empty fragments, and here we need some class names. So as we did earlier, I'm just going to paste in some of the class names that we'll be using in this blog page. So these are the Tailwind CSS class names. Again, these class names would be made available in the GitHub repository. Okay, so here we have section first. So we're going to return a section, and inside this section we are going to have this h2 that says blog, which is just more like the heading of the page. And then we have a subheading. For now we just have this dummy data. And next we are going to have this div, and inside this div we are going to be returning inside this div we are going to be rendering the component, which is this blog category card component. Okay, so we are going to bring in, or I'm going to for now bring in dummy data, which are the different categories that we would have in our application. So I'm just going to paste in these blog categories. So we see each blog has a name, an image, and a description. Okay, I think we're forgetting something, the slug, but that's fine. We are going to be making use of the name as a slug in this instance. So over here we are going to reference these blog categories, and we are going to map, and using map we are going to get access to each blog category, and I'm going to return the blog category card that we just defined. Let's confirm if we are exporting this component. We are not, so we need to export this component. So we would need to export this component as a default, so the blog category card, so that we can be able to import it inside this component. Okay, so it's been imported and we're getting error because we need to pass a property. First I'll pass the key, and the name of each blog post is unique, each category, so technology, travel, food. So I'm going to use that as the key. So here we can do each blog category and then the name. And now let's pass the props. The description is going to be equal to the blog category dot description. We also have to pass the image, which is going to be equal to blog category dot image, and we need to pass the name, which is going to be equal to blog category dot name, and we need to pass a slug, which is also going to be equal to blog category dot name. Okay, so let's go on and save this and visit our application. So if I come over to the blog page, we see an error. So we see an invalid source prop, which is this, and we're getting this error because images.unsplash, so this domain has not been configured in our Next.js config. Okay, so let's come back to application and let's come over to our next config.js, and here we need to also pass images configuration, and here we can link the domains, and one domain that we have, so I'm just going to come here, and you see it's complaining about images.unsplash.com as this domain. So I'm just going to copy this domain and I'm going to add it here. So I'm going to save, and if we go back to our application and let's reload, we see that our blog component, our blog page loads properly with the different properties that we've passed to the blog card. So we're actually not done with our blog page. So coming back to continue the other sections of our blog page. So over here, I'm just going to save us some time and pass this paste what we have here. So these are all dummy data, okay? And this is not in the, okay, this is the blog page. Okay, so let me verify, yes. And in here, we have to import the next image. So I'm just going to import image from next image. We're having these errors for the class names. So in order to fix this, I'm just going to bring these class names over here and paste them here. And we see the errors are gone. So let me walk us through the code that we just have in application. We have this div that wraps image. These are all static data. So here we're going to have a featured blog post. So as we progress to the application, we would obviously be replacing this with dynamic data. So for now, we have another image with a source from Unsplash, which has a title, some description, and a list of features. So going back to the application, and here we have our featured blog post section. And lastly, we are going to have another section for our different categories. So here, we're going to have another section for categories. And to lay out this section, we also need another component. So here, I'm going to have a blog card component. I'm going to copy this, and here I'm going to paste this as a blog card component.tsx. And here we have blog card, which is going to be an arrow function. And let's not forget to return this, to export this as the default. So export default block card, and this block card is going to be customizable. So we're going to make it of type FC for arrow function, and here we are going to define the interface of this block card. So it's going to have an image, title, description, an author, and also a date. I'm going to copy this and paste this over here so that here we can receive props. We are getting this error because we need to return JSX in a React component. So for now, I'll just return fragment. And here we can destructure the properties that we expect this component to receive. So this is what happens over here. So we structure image, title, description, all these from the props. And for regarding the JSX, it's also going to be some dummy data. So I'm just going to save us time and paste this dummy data over here. So paste this. Okay, so let's go on and import the image from next image. Okay, and then we need these classes. So for the class names over here, I'm going to have a blog card class names .ts file, and inside this file we are just going to paste these class names. So these tailwind CSS class names would be pasted here, and in here we can go on to import these blog card class names that we have. Okay, so that's coming back to our blog page. We're going to have the blog content. So somewhere here after the class names, I'm going to paste the blog content that we have. So it's still dummy data, image, title, description, and author, and also a date. So that over here we can have a div with the class name of grid, gap of 6, and on medium devices we can have grid calls 2. So I'm going to hit enter, and in here I'm going to map through the blog content that we have, and here we're going to have each blog, just leave it blog, and here we are going to return the blog card component. So make sure the blog card component has been imported. So this blog card, I'm just going to move this to the top. And as you can see here, we are using this way of importing. So just add and then components, so you don't have to start doing, something like dot dot here and dot dot here to reference that component, which is a pretty handy way or new feature in Next.js. So here, let's provide the props. So the author is going to be the blog.author, and the date is going to be equal to blog the date, and also description is going to be equal to blog.description. What else do we have? Image is going to be equal to blog.image, and we have title, which is going to be equal to blog.title, and lastly we need to provide a key, and for the key I would also use the blog.title. So each blog content has a unique title, so I'm just going to use that as the key. Okay, in a real application, the key is usually a unique generated ID. So let's save this and let's see what we have going in our blog page. So this is the data that we have going, and we have successfully laid out our blog page. Now we can visit any of these card components. So let's click on this, and you see that we go to /blog/technology, and this goes on to load the blog item page, so which is this page over here that gets loaded. We can obviously inspect, and here we see the blog item page. Okay, so we're going to be working on this page in the next video. We're going to be laying out the blog item page, and once we're done with this, we can dive deeper into the exciting features that we have in Next.js. Alright, so let's go on and lay out the JSX for our blog Slug, so our blog Slug page. And I'm going to collapse all these tabs we have open, and I'll come over to the pages folder, to the blog, and here where we have the blog page. Okay, so first I'm going to paste CSS class names, tailwind CSS class names, and also blog categories that we'll be using in this page. So these are the class names for that we'll be making use of in this blog page. I'm also going to take this off so that here we can have a function that has or that uses the return keyword. And here I'm just going to start with a fragment, and next I'm going to paste this JSX that we have for the header, and let's go on to import the the image from next image. And we see here that we have just this, the blog title, so the blog post title, and the subtitle, and the author. So for now, these are hard coded, but we'll be replacing this with dynamic data in a while. So I'm just going to save this. And if we go back to our application, we see that this is what we have going. So we have the title, a description, the author, and an image for the author. So this one, I'm just going to collapse this. And after that, we have more content about the blog, so which is this over here. So, just referencing some of these tailwind class names that we have defined here with dummy data. So the blog title, the date of the blog, and the content of the blog. Okay, I'm going to save this, and going back to the application, this is what we have. So the image, the blog title, the date, and the actual blog post content. Okay, so lastly, we are going to come back to our application, and where we have the more like a read more section, we're just going to have this JSX here, which is making use of the blog category card component. So do well to import the blog category card component, and let's save. So this is a more read section. We have a little description, and here we are also going to fetch the blog categories so that we can map through it and display in our blog page. So coming back here, this is the more read section, and in here we have the different different blog cards. So this is it for laying out the JSX for our slug. And yes, we can now finally move away from the world of static data to the world of dynamic data. We are going to understand how different rendering works in Next.js, client-side rendering, and also server-side rendering, and how we can use these to our advantage in our applications. We are done with our slug page. Let's go on to the world of dynamic data. And Next.js comes with a special folder, which is inside this pages folder, and that is the API folder. And this API folder is useful, or is used in Next.js to write backend code, server-side code that we can call in our front end. So this hello.ts file that we have over here, any request, any API request coming to localhost 3000, that is our domain, /API /hello.ts is going to fetch this data. Okay, so this has to be a Node.js code, so a Node.js backend code. I'm going to delete this hello.ts, and so that we can write our own from scratch. So here in this API folder, I'm going to have a blog.ts file, and here let's go on to render or return our blog content. So in here we are going to have, we're going to export a function as the default. Okay, and this function is going to be called handler. So by default we call this function handler like this, and this is the function. Okay, so this function in Node.js is going to typically receive a request and a response, and this request is going to be of type a Next API request, which we import from Next. And this request object is an object. It contains information about the incoming request. Okay, and that information can be things such as the HTTP method. So it could be a guest method, a post request. It can contain the HTTP request header and any query parameter or any form data. Okay, so I'm going to hold command again, and if I click on this next API request, this should take us to an internal documentation. So it's taking some time to load. Okay, it's taking some time to load and eventually doesn't come up. But it's an object that contains more data about the incoming request. So how about the response? This response is also going to be of type Next API response. And this Next API response also has to be imported from Next. And this response, so this response we have here also contains, is an object. Okay, it's an object that is used to construct a response that is going to be sent back to the client. So this request receives the incoming request data, also has access to method or any query parameter, and this response over here, we are going to use it to be able to construct a response that we would send back to the client. Okay, it could be the status code and also a request body. So we have our handler function, and inside here, we want to handle only get request. Okay, so one thing we can do, we can say if the request dot method, so if this request dot method if it's equal to get, then we are going to handle the incoming request here. Otherwise, that means we are not getting a get request. We are going to return a response with a status code of 400 and also a JSON object that's going to have a message, and this message is just going to be unsupported method. So that's it for the error message we are going to send back. And here, where we are sure that we're getting the correct request method, we're going to send a response with a status code of 200, which is more like successful. And we're going to have a JSON object. And this JSON object is going to be the blog content. So if we come back to our page, and here the index for the blog, not our index.ts. So that is over here where we have our blog, and here we have our index.ts. So here where we have this blog content, I'm going to cut this, or for now I'll copy so that we don't break our code. And coming back to our API blog.ts, so somewhere here I'm just going to paste this blog content. Okay, so this blog content, which is the array we had before, is what we are going to return over here. So it's our blog content. Okay, and let me see if I can visit this next API request. Okay, now I can, and we see that this next API request contains any query, cookie, any body, any env, any preview, and preview data. But we don't see any request method, and you see that this interface is extending another interface, which is incoming message. So if we hold Control or Command and click on this incoming message, we can see that it's a class, and here it has a HTTP version number. But if we scroll, we can see we have here we have headers, and here we have raw headers, and here we have method. So this method is going to be of type string, and that is the property that we are accessing over here. Okay, and for the response, it's just the same. If you hover on it, you can see the properties that it has. So in this case, we are accessing the status, which is type status code, and then we are sending back JSON data. So let's save this, and in the next video we are going to be sending a request to this method, to this function, this handler function, and we are going to start first with client-side rendering, which is something we are used to in our React application, and then we are going to change that to rendering on the server side. So let's continue in the next video. Let's go on and let's fetch this data that we just defined in our API blog.ts. Let's go on and call this function or access this endpoint in our blog index.tsx. So over here where we have blog content, we are going to be changing this, so it's no longer going to be static data. It's still static data, but it's not going to be coming from here. It's going to be coming from a backend, okay, which is our undefined backend. So here I'm going to bring in use effect from React. So please do go on to import use effect from React. And use effect, in case you're not familiar with use effect, is a hook that is being called before the component is mounted onto the screen. So inside here, we can go on to, access data that is coming from a backend, which we want to do in this case. So here we're going to, first, let's not forget to add an empty array for dependency. So here we're going to have an async function, and this async function, we can just call it fetch block data. This async function, we are going to have a response, okay? And this response we need to await because we are inside an async function. We're going to be using the fetch API, which is built into JavaScript, and now it needs the URL. Okay, and here you can see that the URL is going to be /api/blog.ts. So this URL is going to come into this file. We have this function over here. Is going to pass in the request and automatically get this response, and then we are going to be sending back this response only if it's a get request. Okay, so by default, without specifying the method, is going to be a get request. So we are going to target /api/blog and without the .ts, okay, just like this. So /api/blog, and using fetch API, we need to transform our response by also awaiting the response that we get .json. Okay, now we have our response. We need to save it in state. So next we need to import another React hook, and in this case we need to import the useState hook. So but first let's destructure block data and also set block data. Okay, now it's going to be equal to useState, and by default it's going to be an empty array, which is okay. And once we have our data, we are going to call set block data, and we're going to pass in the data. Okay, so we are done, and here we should do well to call our fetch block data function. So this use effect is going to be called when this component 4 is mounted onto the screen. This function is going to be called, and when we have the data, we are going to update our state, and now we need to use this block data. Okay, so here where we map through the block content, I'm just going to comment this out. We are no longer needing it. So rather than map through the block content, we are going to map through the block data. We're going to first of all be sure it's there. So we're going to do something like this. If we have block data, please do go on and map through the block data. Okay, we are getting these errors for now because we have not defined the type of our block data. We would fix this in the coming videos, but one workaround is to say this is going to be of type any. Okay, so let's go on to save this, but before that, let me do well to log this to the console. So let's log data to the console to be sure that we are actually getting this block content from the server side. I'm going to save this, and if we come back to our application, let's see, yes, our server is still up and running. And let's open the developer tools. We see that we get back an array of 4 items, which are these items that we have defined in our API route. So in our blog.ts API route, and we see that we still render this data onto the screen. Now, one thing we should have in mind is that these data are being rendered on the client side and not on the server side. So one way to know, if we right click and we come over to view page source. So here, if we try to wrap this up, we see that we can't find the content of we can't find this content. So this our block data by we can't find all of these on the screen. So if I just copy this and come here to find and I paste this, we see that it's nowhere to be found. So this data for search engine optimization isn't searchable by web crawlers. Okay, so this is client-side rendering, and this is what we get by default in a React.js application. Now we are going to move away from client-side rendering, and we are going to see how we can be able to fetch this data on the server side in Next.js. We just had a look at the API folder in Next.js, and now we want to know how we can render or fetch our data on the server side. So for that, I am back to the official documentation for Next.js. So here we have the documentation, basic features, and for data fetching, so in this section, the overview section. So here we can see that data fetching in Next.js. So it allows us to render our content in different ways, okay? And these ways, they include server-side rendering or static generation. And Next.js also offers incremental static generation. So if we come over to this section, you can see the getServerSideProps. And this is how this function looks like. So this function is going to be called, or has to be called, getServerSideProps, and takes in the context as argument, okay? And this function has to be written or exported only in the pages folder. So in our pages, so all the files, all the routes we have in our pages folder, that's where we can go on to use this method, so this function, okay? And you see that getServerSideProps runs only on the server side, okay, and never on the browser. So what this means is that whatever code we write here is going to be on the server side, okay? So we can expose sensitive data here, and it's not going to be visible on the client side. It's not going to be visible on the browser. So you see, getServerSideProps runs at request time, okay, and it's going to be returned to the page. So the data is going to be returned to the page as props. And when you request this page on the client through, let's say, next link, so Nextjs sends an API request to the server. Okay, and this is going to call the getServerSideProps. Okay, and when should you use this getServerProps? So you can use these props if you need to render a page, where the data has to be fetched at the request time. So for every request, that's where we can go on to use getServerSideProps. And then we have getStaticProps, which is also a function that has to be exported only in our pages folder. And you can use this function when the data is available at build time, okay, ahead of the user's request. Okay, and if also this data comes from a headless CMS, we are going to go into the world of headless CMS with Sanity.io in a while, and you see if the page must be pre-rendered or if the data can be publicly cached, and stuff like that. So let's see how we can use these methods in our application. And coming back to our blog, so here, not our API, our blog index. So here at the bottom, so we can go on to delete this. I'll just leave it behind. So here, just directly below where we export our blog page, I'm also going to export another async function, and I'm going to use getStaticProps. And this getStaticProps is going to be called with the context as we saw in the documentation, like this. Now this context, the type of this context is next page context, okay? And next page context needs to be imported from next. Now we have this function. You might be wondering, what is this context? So this context also contains some data, okay? So it's an object. You see it contains the error data with the request, response, the path name. So this path name is the path segment of the URL. It contains query, and it contains some other information. Okay, so back here, inside this getStaticProps, remember this is an async function, and we are exporting. Okay, so inside this getStaticProps, we need to return. So you have to return an object. Okay, and this object, you need to have a props key. And here we are going to return the data. Now whatever we return here inside this props key is going to be passed to our blog page as props. Okay, so over here we can receive this as props in our blog page. Okay, so what we can do here, we can for one, remove this console.log that we had from previous lectures. And here I'm just going to come back here and come over to our blog.ts. So I'm going to copy this function that we had earlier. Okay, going to delete this. So here, what we are going to be returning, I'm just going to paste what we copied over here, which is our blog content. So I'm going to return this blog content here. Okay, so this props is an object. So here you can say blog content like this, and this blog content is going to reference this blog content that we had over here. Okay, now just a brief recap. This code is going to be run or called on the server side and not on the client side. Okay, so whatever we put here is going to be called on the server side. And now in this component we are receiving props. Again, for now, as a short hand, we can tell TypeScript to relax that this is going to be of type any. But if we come here and we console.log props, okay, so let's save this and go back to our application. Yes, and we can see over here, so in this object that we have, no, this is coming from index.jsx line 11, and line 11 is where we are logging this to the console. We see that we have this blog object, so props.blog content is an array. Okay, and we have an array of these values. So what we can do here is come back to application. So here where we have props, we can destructure. So I'm just going to move this up. So here we can destructure the blog content from our props. Okay, blog content, and this blog content, we're going to take it, and here rather than map through the blog data that we are getting from our API/blog folder, I'm going to comment this out, and I'm also going to comment out the code we had on our use effect. So here we are going to be mapping through our blog content. Okay, so we can remove this safety guard that we had there. So that optional chaining. So blog content, we are sure is going to be there because we are returning it here. And I'm going to save this, and if we come back to our browser, we see that we have this content. I'm just going to reload, and you see over here we have the same data as before, but if I open this time around, if we go over to the page source and we wrap this line and we come back and we copy, let's say, James Smith, and we search in our page source, we can see that we have James Smith over here. So this data is now being rendered on the server side. And now this is one awesome feature of Next.js. We see that how rather than fetch all this data on the client side as we have in our normal React application, we're having this data being fetched on the server side and passed down as props to our JSX, to our components. So this is one way that Next.js differs from React.js. Now we have made use of this getStaticProps, and there's also getServerSideProps. You might be wondering, when do you use which? So let's discuss this in the next video. So getServerSideProps and getStaticProps, when do we use which? Back to the official documentation in the data fetching docs where we have the getServerSideProps. Now we know how to use the getStaticProps. We used it in the last video. And the getServerSideProps, when does this run? So see that this only runs on the server side, okay? And any code that we inject or that we write inside this function never runs on the browser. Okay, so if we are using getServerSideProps in your application, so when you request this page, okay, so when this page is being requested on the client side, so it could be using Nest link to navigate or Next router. We are yet to see how to use Next router to navigate programmatically. You see, Nextjs sends an API request which runs getServerSideProps. So getServerSideProps is being called on request time. So data is being fetched on every request. So in the context of Next.js, getServerSideProps is a function that is called at request time on the server before the page is rendered. And now this allows us to go ahead to fetch data from an external API, or it could be a database, and we use that data to pre-render the page on the server. So with the necessary data, in this case, we are going to pass it to the page as props. Okay, so if we use getServerSideProps rather than getStaticProps, this function is going to be called every time whenever this page is being requested. So whenever a user navigates to this page, this getServerSideProps is going to be called, okay? So as we see here, when should I use it? So you should use getServerSideProps only when you need to fetch data on request time. As I said, whenever this page or the page that we use getServerSideProps, whenever the page is being requested, this function is going to be called. And why will you do something like this? So it could be the nature of the data, could be specific to a particular user. In this case, it could be authorization header. So whichever or whenever a user requests that page, you want to check the authorization headers if the user has the right access to request the page, or it could be the geolocation. Okay, so as I've said, is all these getServerSideProps will be called at request time, and it can only be cached if cache control headers are being configured. So this is how we use when we use getServerSideProps. How about getStaticProps? So getStaticProps is used to render a page at build time. So this is where getStaticProps differs from getServerSideProps. So this is at build time. And when we use getStaticProps, we use it to prefetch and also pre-render the data at build time. So that data is going to be available to our pages whenever a user requests it. And this is very much ideal when we are rendering data that doesn't change frequently. So in the case of getServerSideProps, you need to check the user authorization headers or stuff like that. But in getStaticProps, this data is coming from a CMS, so a content management system, or it could be a JSON file, or even a local database. So this data that you pass to your component as props doesn't change frequently. So then we can go ahead to be using getStaticProps. So when does this getStaticProps run? See, it runs during next build. So it can also run in the background whenever we pass fallback through. So fallback through can be passed to the object that is being returned. It can also be called at initial render when we use fallback blocking, and it can run in the background using revalidate. So this revalidate is an interesting one, and if we click on incremental static generation, if we should click on this link, you can see that getStaticProps can be run in the background. Okay, so if we click on this link, it takes us to the documentation, which is ISR, incremental static regeneration. And here we can see that you can pass this revalidate. So in this object that is being returned, if we pass this revalidate and then it takes a number, in this case 10, so this means that Next.js will attempt to regenerate this page. So whenever a request comes into this page, at most once every 10 seconds, Next.js in the background is going to call this getStaticProps function, and maybe we are building an online shop where we have some data that doesn't change often in application or a blog. Then we can use revalidate and say, okay, every 10 seconds or 60 minutes or 30 minutes, you can go on to re-render this page, on the background. Maybe the data, we expect the data to change, or maybe you have a new blog post and it's not something that should be fetched in, at all times. So you can go ahead to start using getServerSideProps. GetStaticProps will be ideal for that kind of scenario. So we have seen getStaticProps and getServerSideProps. We also have getStaticPath. GetStaticPath will be discussed when we start working with our slug. So with our post log, we are going to visit this getStaticPath function. But this is getServerSideProps and getStaticProps and how they differ and when we should use which. So let's continue in our application in the next video. So we have been able to see how data fetching works in Next.js. First, we saw how it works on the client side, so using useEffect and useState. And we saw that this isn't good for SEO. And we have also seen how to do it on the server side using getStaticProps and, in theory, getServerSideProps. So let's make some improvements in our application. And first, I'm going to take this off so that we can just have our application lean, or maybe I can just leave it behind for reference. And over here where we set the props type to any, and over here where we also set the props type to any, we can go on to change that. But first we can pass in this object that is being returned from getStaticProps. So over here we can pass the revalidate, and here we can pass for 3600. So what this means is on build time, so on every page request within 60 minutes, which is 1 hour, we are going to get static props. And then this function, for now, is still dummy content. We are yet to go into CMS using sanity.io. But for now, we just say every 60 minutes to go on and fetch this data and return. For now, it's just dummy context, okay? So let's save it. And for the type of this blog, what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to come to our source folder and I'm going to create a models folder. And in here, I'm going to have a blog.ts file. Okay, so we can model our blog. So to make this easy on our side, where we have this blog card component, I will just go to the component. And here we already have a model. So I'm just going to take this object here and I would paste it here, but not like this. I'm going to have a type which I would call blog. So we can just call this blog and with a capital B, okay? And we're having an error because we need to export this type. So let's go and export default blog like this. Okay, and we also need to make this equal to this object. So we can go on to save and we see our blog type is going to be an object like this. And here we can, rather than say this is going to, not the blog card, rather than say this is going to be of type any, you can say our blog is going to be of type blog. And this blog is going to be imported from the models folder. And here where we have props, we can say this page, so this is our blog page, is going to be of type, we can say it's going to be of type next page. So next page needs to be imported from next. So this is going to be of type next page. If we hover on this type, we see that it takes in props, which is an object, okay? So what we can do, rather than say this props is going to be of type any, we can have an interface here. We can have an interface that we call blog page props. It's going to be an object. And this next page that we have here is a generic type. And here we can say we're expecting to have a type of blog page props, okay? And here, rather than say this is of type any, we are going to take it off. And now we have an error because it doesn't know we have this blog content. So we can say we're going to have a blog content type, and this blog content is going to be of type blog that we're reporting. So here we have an error. And why do we have? Map doesn't exist on type blog, and that's because this is an array. So we can say it's going to be of type blog array. Okay. Now the error is gone, and we have been able to define the types of our page, and we have also been able to define the type here, and everything is in sync with TypeScript. So let's visit our application. For one, we can see the terminal is up and running. And going back to application and we reload the page, we see everything works as intended, and if we check for errors in the console, we don't have any errors. So that is it. Let's continue with Next.js in the next video. Moving away from the world of static data and the official documentation for Sanity.io, and let's have a basic understanding of what Sanity is, and then we see how we can inject Sanity in our Next.js application. So the official documentation for Sanity, that is sanity.io, and sanity.io is a headless CMS, and what it does is that it allows us to structure our content in a way that it makes sense to our specific needs. So Sanity.io allows us to manage our content in a way that is much more user-friendly. And it does this by giving us features such as real-time collaboration, also version control, and also a structured way of modeling our content. Okay, and one of the best things about Sanity.io is flexibility. So with Sanity.io, we can work with different programming languages, different frameworks. And if you come over to developers, you can see the frameworks that we can use with Sanity.io. So it ranges from React, Vue, Next.js, Next, Svelte, Remix, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it offers a range of integrations with these popular tools, and it makes it easy to build fast, responsive, and also highly engaging digital experiences that are optimized for search engines and also social media. Okay, so with Sanity.io, we can go on to build and manage and also publish content on the web. Let's see, how do we get started? So in the developers navigation over here, if you come over to documentation, so let's go over to the docs. And here, if you come over to the getting started guide, first we need to create a project. Okay, so we're going to be doing this on our CLI, on our command line. We're going to be creating a project, and once we create a project, we would go on to create a schema. So we need to install Sanity Studio, running this command npm create sanity at latest. We are going to be running this command on our terminal, and then once we're done, you see we can go on to create an account. So please do go on to create an account or login, and once we're done, we can go on to create a schema. Okay, and in this case they create a pet schema, and this schema, you see the meaning. So the name over here, this name over here, pet, is a name that we are going to be using to query this pet document. So we are going to be running queries against our own documents we are going to be creating, and that's what this name is for. And this type shows it's a document that we're going to have, more like a document we're going to have in our database, if I'm to put it like that. And this title pet is just for Sanity.io, so it's going to give us a user interface that we can interact and create our content. So in that user interface, we're going to have this pet title, and then this fields array, more like saying that the schema, that's this pet schema, is going to have a name, and the name is going to be of type string, and also it's going to have a title, which is the name. So this is what we have over here, and then we can inject the schema inside our schema types. We're going to see all these in action, and once we create a schema, we can go on to create a content based off of the schema that we create. Okay, and once we create a content, we go on to connect the content. So without wasting any more time, let's come back to our project and let's get started with sanity.io. Alright, so let's create a sanity.io project, and I'm going to create a new folder, And then I'm going to call this folder front end. And that's because our Sanity project is totally different from what we have in Next.js, okay? So they are gonna live in separate folders, separate directory. I'm gonna copy all the files we have here and I'm gonna move them into the front end folder. And after which, so we have our Next.js project inside the front end. I'm going to create a new folder called CMS. And inside this, that's where we are going to have our Sanity IO backend. I'm going to open on the terminal, and inside the terminal, I'm going to navigate into the CMS folder. And inside the CMS folder, we can go on to log into sanity.io. And then I'm going to run the command sanity login and execute. So it's going to fetch the different providers and it's going to ask how do we want to authenticate. Okay, so let's give it some time to fetch the providers. I'm going to choose Google. And then this is going to open up the browser for us to go on to log into sanity.io. So I'm going to log into this test account that I created. So I'm going to choose this account and so we're going to sign up. So what kind of work? I'm just going to go into software development. What is your role? I'm just going to go with using Sanity for personal project. I accept and click on continue. Okay, so it's gonna take a while. And then we have successfully logged in, so we can close this tab and return to the terminal. So I'm just going to close this and come back to our project. So we have successfully authenticated. Okay, so now we have successfully authenticated. I'm going to run the command npm create sanity at latest. So this is going to go on and create a new sanity project for us, and it's gonna fetch existing projects. We don't have none, and now we need to give this project a name. I'm just gonna give this project the name of Nextjs blog and execute. It's going to tell us to choose a path on where we want to save this project. So let's see. Okay, it asks us the data set. We're going to go with production. We have production data set and we have staging. So production, this data set is more like a database. That's the way you can think about it. So I'm going to go with next, yes, and this is going to create the data set, so the database, and then we have to choose an output path. So this output path is inside our CMS folder, so I'm going to go on to execute. And then it's going to tell us to choose a schema. So it's going to come with some schema and some sample data. In this case, I'm going to go with clean project with no predefined schemas. Do you want to use TypeScript? I would say yes. And then it's going to go on to bootstrap some files and templates inside our CMS folder. So here it's not done yet. So it's still going to ask us if we want to use npm and if we want to use yarn to go on and install the dependencies of this project. So it's creating the project files. We have our package.json, and then I'm going to hit enter to use npm. And now it's going to go on to install the dependencies that we have in this project. So as you can see, Sanity.io uses React DOM, and style components, and we also have some Sanity dependencies over here. And while it's installing, we can see already that we have a schema folder here, and this schema folder is where we can go on to write the different models, so the different schemas that we have in applications. So in this case, we are building out a blog application, so we're going to have a blog schema, maybe an author schema. We're going to have also a category schema, and any schema we create, we are going to import inside this array over here. And then we have some static, just have some gits over there, ESLinting. We have Sanity CLI, but most importantly, we have this Sanity config. And in here, so the dependencies are still being installed. That's why we're getting this error. But in here, you see the name of our folder, of our project. So here It has the name of default. We see the title, which we gave Next.js blog, and we see the project ID. This project ID is very much important, and with this project ID, we are going to be able to connect our Sanity project, which we have in the CMS folder, to what we have in our Next.js front-end folder. So this is the project ID, and the dataset we're using is production. And for plugins, these are some tools that Sanity.io uses to, visually represent or give us the UI. So we're going to have the Dex tool, and in this Dex tool, that's where we are going to go on to be creating. That's where we're going to go on to be creating our project, our content. Sorry. And then this schema, so we have the schema types, and these schema types, if you see, is imported from this schema folder. So any schema we register here, Sanity.io is going to be aware of it. So just give this some time, and in the background, I'm just going to let this install. And when we come back, we are going to start creating a schema. We are going to first start off by creating a category schema. And once we're done, we are going to import that schema inside the schema types, and then we can go on to see how we can connect what we have in Sanity to Next.js. So I'll be back. All right, so we have our Sanity.io project is fully installed. Let's go on and open the terminal, and let's see what we have going. I'm going to run the command npm run dev. And if we come to the package.json, you can see over here that we have some scripts. So we're running the script npm run dev, which gives us the sanity dev. And then we're going to have a local preview on localhost 3333. So I'm going to click. And here we can have an idea of what the Sanity Studio looks like. So we have to authenticate. I'm going to choose Google. And we need to sign in. I'm going to use this test account. And yes, so we have successfully authenticated, and you see that we are on localhost 3333/dex. So this is the dex tool that we saw earlier. And then we have no document type. So we need to at least have one document type in our schema. Coming back to our project, in the schemas directory, we have our index.ts. Let's create a category schema. I'm going to create a new file and call this category.ts. And here we need to export this object as the default. So I'm going to export default object. And this object, let's give it a name of category. This name is going to be the name we are going to use whenever we are running queries against this category schema. And then we have a title. And this title, I'll give category. And this title is what we are going to be able to see or use in our Sanity.io decks whenever we are creating content. Okay. And then we're going to give it a type and say this is of type document. Like this. And after the type, let's provide the fields that we expect our category to have. So we're going to have fields, which is going to be an array of objects. Okay. So the first object we're going to have, or the first field we expect our category to have, is a name. Okay. I'm going to give it name like this. And then title, also name. And then we are going to give it a type of string like this. It has to be a string, okay? And then we can add some validation. So how do we do that? We have a validation. Sanity.io gives us access to a validation function. Sorry if I can spell. And this validation function, we can use an arrow function, is going to have one parameter, which is the rule. And we can say this rule is going to be of type any. And now we need to return rule and then have the different rules that we expect. So in this case, we expect this rule, this string to be required. Okay, so that's for the name. And next, we can have another field. And this name, we're going to give it image. And for the title, we're going to go with image. And what type? we're going to go with URL. So this has to be a URL for the image type. We're going to see how we can use a file. So we're going to see how we can use file and also a URL. But for now, let's just go with URL for our category. And for our validation object, we are just going to take what we have over here. So like this. And one other thing, we can expect it to be a URL by adding this URI, by chaining this URI method here as well. Okay, and lastly, we also have a name of description. Okay, and the title of description. And then for the type, we expect it to be a text, okay, a longer text, okay. And for validation, we're just going to take what we have over here, okay, like this. And this is, you can also chain main and say this should have a minimum of 20 characters like this. So lastly, we expect a category to have a slug. So we need to add another method, another object, and this is going to have a name of slug. It's going to also have a title of slug, a type of slug. So there's also a slug type, okay, and we have to pass in some options, okay. We can still forward paste this validation rule that we have. So here we can go with validation like this, but we need the slug to be created from this name. Okay, so how do we do that? We can also pass an options object like this. We can also pass an options object, and this options object, we can say it has a source, and this source is going to be coming from name. So it's going to be coming from name. That's how we connect this slug together with the name. And then we also need to, let's give it a max length of, let's say, 100 characters. And now let's create this slug, because this name might have a white space, okay, and in the URL there's no white space, okay. Now this can lead to bugs in our application, so let's go on to replace any white space that we have with a dash. So if we have something like top cities as our blog, for the name, we want to go on and replace this with a dash. And in order for us to do that, Sanity.io also gives us a slugify function, and this slugify function is going to be called with the input. This input is going to be this name, so we know this is going to be coming from the name. We can give it type any, and then we're going to go with input dot lowercase, okay, like this. And then we can also replace, so this is where the magic happens. So we can go on and call replace, and this is normal JavaScript that we're doing in here, okay. So we can replace, and let's use a regex expression and say we want to replace like this any space that we have. So this is how we're going to do it, and we want to replace it with what? We want to replace it with a hyphen like this. Okay, so this is our category schema. If we go on and save, we go back to application, nothing happens because we have not linked this schema. So if we come back to our index.ts, we need to have the category schema over here. So go on and import category from this category file that we created. Okay, so this is our category schema. And here, once we save this and we go back to the browser, we see it refreshes, and now we have one content, our category. Okay, see, this is a capital C, and this category, that name you're seeing, comes from this title over here. Okay, so if we click on this, you see the different fields that we have. For now, we don't have any document because we have not created any document. So to create a document, you click on this pen tool here. Now you need to give it a name. You see that this button is disabled until all of these are passed. So I'm just going to go with a name of top cities, like this. And here you see that we have all these logs. You see it means it's not a valid URL and it's also required. For description, we see that is required, and for slug, we see that is required. Okay, but the slug we need to generate. So we have the generate button over here for the slug because of this. We say that the slug has a source from the name. Okay, and now if we click on this generate, we see that input dot lowercase is not a function. Let's see, and that is because this needs to be to lowercase like this. Okay, so we're going to save this, and if we come back, it reloads, and we can go on to click on generate input dot to lowercase. So are we missing something? Yes, because this C needs to be a capital C. Sorry about that. Then we save. If we come back this time around, we can go on to click on generate, and we have our slug generated. Okay, now for the image, it needs to be a valid URL. I'll quickly go on to Unsplash. So you can Google Unsplash, and here I'm just going to click on the link, and I'm just going to type cities. And here I'm just going to pick any image. So I'm just going to copy image address, and so that we can use it for our content, I'll paste over here. And for the description, we're going to use some lorem ipsum text. So I'm just going to click over here and just generate some text. So I can just copy this standard text like this. Okay, and I'll do well to remove this quote sign here. So I'm going to paste this. Okay, and this is our description. We can go on and publish. You can see it's saving in real time. So we're going to click on publish, and we see that we have gone on to publish our document. Okay, so we have one document over here, this top cities. You can click on these three dots here, and then you can inspect. And once you inspect, you see the JSON representation of what we just created here. So it has this created at, which is the time of we created this document. It has an ID, it has this rev, it has a type, updated at, it has description, and this is the image, the name, and then slug. This slug is an object, it has a type, and then it has current, and this current is where we have our slug. We have been able to create this category schema. We have been able to create a content. In the coming videos, we shall go on to create our author schema and also a schema for our blog. So let's continue using sanity.io. Alright, so we have seen how to create a schema and how we can link this up. Let's quickly come back to the application and let's create another schema. For this time around, let's create a schema for our author. So here we're going to have an author.ts file. Okay, and here we should go on and export default an object. You can give it a name of author. This should be .ts, so I'm just going to rename this. A name of author, a title of author, a type of document, and then let's go for the fields. And these fields, I'm going to give it a name of name, because an author is going to have a name. So this title of this name is going to be name, and it's going to be of type string. Okay, and then for validation, we're just going to make it required. Okay, row is going to be of any type. Then we're going to say the row dot required like this. Okay, so that's for our name, and I will just copy this, and here is going to be for our image, and for the title, image is going to be of type URL again. For validation, now it gets a little bit interesting. Let's see how we can have our own custom validation. Okay, and here we have this callback function. So we have row.required, and then we also have custom. So this custom is going to give us access to having a custom validation. And here we can have a callback function inside here, and this function is going to receive two parameters, or one value, and this value is going to be of type string. Okay, what does this value mean? This value means this input, so for the image. Okay, so the value it receives here, and let's go on to confirm that it must be a URL. In the category schema, we saw that we have .uri, but I just want to show us how we can go on to have our own custom validation. Okay, so this input is going to be of type string, and here where let's say we have type any, it can also be a string, because we know that this log is going to be a string. Okay, so here inside this validation, we can go on to have an if statement, an if check. So let's see. So here we're going to say if, then we have another regex expression to check if this is not let's see, if this is not a URL. Okay, so here we're going to have this caret sign. Okay, and here we're going to check HTTPS like this. Okay, and then we have a plus like this, just have a dot, and then we have another /s, and then we have a plus, and then to avoid casing, we just use this I, and then we can go on to have a test on this regex expression, and we can test the value that we receive to match this, and then if it passes, so if it doesn't pass, so if this test doesn't pass, we can go on to return this warning that says image must be a valid URL like this. Else we can go on to return true. So this is our custom validation. We have this custom validation, and if this validation is true, we're not going to have this. We just go on to return true, and then we can go on to create an image. So this is our author schema. We can come over to our index.js, and here we are going to also have our author. So I'm going to go on to save this. If we come back to our Sanity, we have this author here, and we can come over here and create a document. Okay, so it needs a name and an image. Okay, for now we have this image, but we're going to get an image. So for name, I just go to my name, lari bright, and for image, I would come over to Unsplash, and here I'll just go with avatar, and I will just pick I'll just go with this because these are not my images. So I'll just copy image address, and here I would paste. But if I Ctrl Z, we look at the validation, you see not a valid URL, and we also see that image must be a valid URL, and this is our own custom validation here. So I'm going to paste this, and we can click on publish. So once we publish, we can now go on to query our author, and we see this. So let's continue creating the last schema. So we're going to come back, and we are going to create our blog schema. Our blog schema, we have a whole lot to learn. We are going to see how to use our own custom validation, how we can also have so in case we want our image to be a URL, or we want our image from the file system. We're going to see all of these in action. All right, let's go on and create a schema for our blog. So I'm going to create another schema and I'll call this blog.ts. We're going to export default, an object, and this object, I'm going to give it a name of blog. You can actually go on to create this blog schema. At least our blog is going to have a title, a description, an image, and a validation. So we're going to learn more when it comes to image and validation, but at least you can attempt to have these basic fields and wire it up to the index.ts. Okay, so you can just have some time to pause and come back and follow up. Okay, welcome back. I hope you were able to pause. But let's continue. So we have a title, and this title, we give it a blog. And we can say this is going to be of type document. And let's have the different fields. So a field is going to be an array of objects. So it's going to have a name. And this name is going to be title. So that's the title of our blog. Our blog is going to have a title. And it's also going to have a title, which is title. And this title, remember, is for Sanity UI. Our blog is also, this title is going to be of type string. Okay, and then we have our validation object, our validation function, which is going to receive a rule of type any. And here we are going to say rule.required, and then .main, and then we're going to go with 4 characters. Okay, so this is our title schema. Sorry, our blog schema. It also has another object, a name, which is going to be description, and this is also going to have a title of description. So we have a typo here. This should be description, and this should be description with a capital D and 1 S. And then it's going to be of type text for longer string. And for the validation, so validation, we're going to have a rule, which is going to be of type any. And we can just copy what we have here. But this time around, we can say a description should have minimum 20 characters. Okay, as we have min, we also have max. And this max is going to take in the number, okay? But we need min this time around. Now, for the image, so we're going to have this object. And this name, we're going to give image. And then we're going to give it a title. This name should be image with a small I. So we're going to give it a title of image. And this image, we're going to say is going to be a type. And this type is going to be an object. Okay? And for the fields, it also has a title. So you see, since it's an object, we are providing the different fields that it's going to have, which is how it differs from other schema types, other types that we have created. Okay, so for the title, we can go with image file. Okay, and let's give it a name. So for the name, sorry, it has to be inside here. Okay, so for the name, we can go with file, and for the type, we go with file again. Okay, please just try to follow up. The title of this field is going to be image file, just as we have here, title, name, as we've always done. So the title, image file, the name is file, and this type is file. Okay, and then we can pass some other options. And these options, as we've seen earlier, is going to be an object. An object, and here we can just say accept any file that has this, image, and then start like this. Okay, so this is for our image and being of type object. And then we also have another type for URL. So this is the first field we have over here, and then it needs another type. Okay, so we're going to have an object again, and this object is going to have a title, and then we give image URL. Okay, this is the first field, this is the second one. Okay, and then for the name, we are going to go with URL, and for the type, we also go with URL. Okay, so this is how we can go on to have much more than one field inside our type. So we say this of type object, and these are the different fields. So one is going to be an image file, and the other one is going to be a URL. Okay, and then we can go on to add a validation, and we have our function. We receive our rule, which is going to be any type, and here we can say rule dot required. Okay, and then let's also add a custom validation, and here we're going to have a callback function, and this custom we know is going to take in the value, which is also going to be of type any. And inside here we write our custom validation. So we say if, and then we say no value. So if nothing is provided, or we can also say if there's no value dot file. Okay, in case there is no file provided, and we can say there's no value dot URL. So what happens in this case? Okay, so I just formatted. So in this case, we are going to return a string that's going to say, please provide either an image or an image URL. Okay, otherwise we're just going to return true. Okay, so this is it. We have an image for a blog which has its title, there's an object, and these are the different fields, and then we have our validation over here. Okay, so after our image, we are also going to have another field for is featured, because we have a featured blog post. So we're going to call this is featured, and it's going to have a title of is featured. Okay, and this type is going to be a boolean. And after this, so this has to be a string. We are also going to have a validation. Okay, and this validation comes with a rule. This rule is going to be any type, and here we can say is required. Okay, rule dot required. All right, and we can also have some options. And here in these options, we are going to see that we can also pass a layout like this, and this layout we go with checkbox. Okay, so we're going to say we need a layout for this. So once we toggle a layout, we can use it to toggle this boolean value we have here. And another interesting thing is that we can give this an initial value like this. By default, we want it to be false. So if you don't pass this layout checkbox, we are going to use a toggle, okay? But we need a checkbox. So how do we handle relationships between our blog? Because our blog is going to have an author and also a category. We're going to see how to do that in a while, but for now we can continue and say this is also going to have a date, and the title is going to be a date. Okay, and for type we're going to have date time. Okay, so Sanity.io also has a date time type, and for validation we are also going to use this. So we're just going to say required like this. So I'm going to paste this over here, and for options we can go on to pass a default value. So here we use initial value, but over here we can also pass the default value in our options. So default value, and we can say this default value is going to be a new date like this, and then we go to ISO string. So this is it for our date time, and we can have a features. So our blog is also going to have a features property, so we can give it a name of features, and our title is going to be features, and this is going to be an array type. So the type is going to be of array, and this is going to be an array of what? It's going to be an array of, and then we can have this, so an array of type string. Okay, so this is saying we have a features property which is of type array, and array is going to be of type string. So this is how it's done in the Sanity.io world. So lastly, we have a slug. Not lastly, we are going to look at how we can have relationships, because our blog is going to have a category and it's also going to have an author, which are going to be referencing this other field. So we're going to save that for later. And next we are going to have another property, slug. Okay, and the title is also going to be slug. Okay, and then we're going to have a type of slug. So we have a slug type, and for options this is going to have a source, and this source is going to be coming from the title, and we are also going to give it a max length of 100. Okay, so we can also call slugify in these options. We're going to have the inputs. This is going to be type any, and then we're going to have the inputs, and then we call to lowercase like this, and then we can go on to do as we did earlier. So I'm just going to come over to the category and copy this, so, and then we can call to replace and have this regex expression here. And then lastly we can have a validation, and we can just say is required. So we have our rule, and then we can go on to return the rule required like this. So this is our blog schema. You see it has these different fields: the title, a description, an image, which has two fields. We have is required, we have a name, we have a date, features, slug, and other validation. So this is it, and we can go on to import this our schema in our index.ts. So here we can have our blog schema being imported from /blog. Okay, so if we come here, we see that we have, if we click on this pen tool, we see that we have these fields to go on and create a blog. So we are going to come back in the next video. This is getting quite long already, and create our blog. Alright, welcome back. Let's go on and create our blog. And for this blog, we are going to give it a title of, let's say, top programming languages. For description, we're just going to copy Lorem Ipsum and paste over here, so it's required. For image, So you can go on to upload an image, or you can drag and paste an image here. If we click on upload, we see that we can go on to choose an image from your file directory. In this case, I'm going to use this. If you see the validation, please provide either an image or an image URL. Okay, but I'll just go with image URL, and here, back to Unsplash, I'm just going to search for programming. And next, I'll just take this copy image address, this image we have here, and I'll paste over here. You can see it's required, is not ticked, so we can go on. Sorry, it's featured. This is not a featured post, so we can go on to click to make sure that it's featured by default. And for dates, you see it must be a date. We can go on to choose a date, any date of our choice. Okay, and for features, we have no item. It's going to be an array of string, so we can say it is informative, and we can go on to add this feature. And then for slug, we can go on to generate the slug. Okay, and that is it. So we can go on to publish our blog post. And now our blog post has been published. So we have created the different, let's come back to our blog post. And we see that in creating a blog post, we are not required to have an author or a category, okay? But we always, whenever we create a blog post, we need to have an author or a category that is linked together with that blog post. So let's come back and see how we can establish this relationship between our different schemas. Okay, so let's see how we can establish this relationship between our different schemas. Back to our blog schema. So in our CMS, our schema, our blog.ts file. And let's just come below here. That is, we are inside our fields array. So just come below here. And in here, we can say that each blog post is going to belong to a category. Okay, and here we can have a name of category and give it a title of category. And the type this time around is going to be of type reference. That means we are trying to reference another document, okay? And since it's of type reference, it needs this to property to know the reference that it is referencing. And this is going to go to of type category. Okay, so this is where the magic happens, okay? This type reference, and this is referencing another type of category. Okay, and lastly, we can add our validation. And here we can just go with, saying that this is required. So just use this over here. And next, we can replicate the same thing for our author. This is going to have a title of author. And the type is also going to be reference. And 2 is going to go to the type of author. Okay, and for validation, we can just say it's required. So I'm just going to copy this and use this over here. So this is how we establish a relationship in Sanity.io. Let's save this and come back to our program. We have an error. We didn't spell, so I'm just going to copy this. We need to spell reference correctly, and we made a mistake here, so it needs to be reference. So coming back to our project, everything is fine. And in creating a blog, if we scroll down, now it needs a category and also needs an author. We can go on to create a new author on the fly, or we can use this drop down to choose the one author we created, which is myself. And then for category, we can do the same. Here we have top cities. I'm just going to create a new category. And this name I'm going to give programming languages. For image, I'm just going to use let's see, I'm just going to use this copy image address here. And for description, I'm just going to take some description over here, maybe this, and paste this here. And for Slug, we can go on to generate the Slug programming languages. And then we click on publish, and now we would have this category drop down. Okay, so programming languages here. So this is the program. If you don't want this, you can go on to use replace, and then you can choose top cities or programming languages. But in this case, we need programming languages. So I'm going to go on to click publish, and next you see that we have been able to edit this file that we created. That's this blog that we created. So this is it for Sanity.io, creating schemas, adding validation, adding custom validation, also establishing relationship between different schemas. Now let's see how we can connect our Sanity.io project with our Next.js project and run queries about these different schemas that we have created. Let's see how we can connect our Sanity.io with our Next.js application. So back to the official documentation, we have this section over here that says connect content. So we have a Next.js tab over here, and we see that we need to install. So this is for one a code sandbox, but we won't be using that approach. And you see we need to install the Next Sanity toolkit. And once we install, we go on to configure the client. Okay, and then this is the Next Sanity, and then we call this, we import this create client. And this create client, we are going to pass, we call it as a method, and this create client takes in some configurations. And these are the different configurations that we can pass to create client. And then we have our client, and with this client, we can use it to run queries. So in this case, the pet schema that we saw earlier in the create schema guide here. So we need to run this command, npm install next sanity. I'm going to copy this and come back to our project. And I'm just going to remove all of these. And this command doesn't need to be called in our CMS directory. We need to be in our front end. So I'm going to open, and then I'm going to close the Sanity Studio. Actually, I would leave it running, and I would open another tab for our Next.js front end. So I'm going to cd into our front end and also run. Before we start up our project, let's go on to install the Next Sanity. So run the command npm install next sanity. Okay, so while that's installing, back in our source folder, we are going to create another folder which I would call lib, and lib is for library. So inside this lib folder, I'm going to create a file which I will call sanity.ts. It's going to be a TypeScript file. And inside this file, let's go on and import the create client method from Next Sanity. So we're going to import the create client from the Next Sanity package. So Next Sanity. Okay, so it's still installing. I'm just going to fast forward, and once it's done installing, I'll be back. Alright, so the Next Sanity client has been installed. We're going to import the create client from Next Sanity. Okay, and next we can have our const, which client is going to be equal to create client. Then we need to pass the configurations, so project ID, and this project ID has to come from our CMS. So over here in the CMS, and here we have our sanity config, this project ID over here. So we can copy this and use this here. And then for data sets, We are using our production dataset. And lastly, we're going to say use CDN is going to be true. And then we can go on to export this client as default. So export default client like this. We have our client. Now let's make use of our client and run queries. So let's save this, and if we come back to our front end and in our pages, so let me go on and start our application. So npm run dev. So we come over to our pages, and here in our blog index.ts, let's see what we have. We have this getStaticProps, and this getStaticProps will return our dummy content, which is our blog content over here. Where do we have it? Okay, yeah, it's just here. All right, so what we can do next, let's first visit our application. If we go to localhost 3000, so this is our application. If we go over to our blog page, first we are fetching the different categories that we have in our application. So these are the different categories. Let's start off by replacing or fetching the categories that we have in our Next Studio, in our Sanity Studio. Come over to category. For now, we have 2 categories. So let's go on and fetch them. So how do we fetch? We have been able to successfully set up our client. Let's go on and import our client from our lib folder. So we're going to import client, and client is going to come from our lib and then sanity. So we have our client in here. Let's run a query. We're going to use our client. So we're going to say, let's have a category query. So category query over here. And this category query is going to be equal to, let's visit the Sanity.io documentation and see how we can run queries. So we can see over here, if you come over to developers and you click on GROQ, so this is the query language that we're going to be using. So this GROQ over here, which Sanity.io uses, we can see that over here we have the different queries. So this cheat sheet over here we can make use of. So we see first, if we go with star, that means we're going to fetch all documents. A star with an array, empty array is going to fetch everything with no filters applied. And in this case, we need this type of query so that we can query all categories. So we're going to go with this star and with this array, the square brackets, and we're going to query a type that is equal to, in our case, category. Okay, and this is when you want to say equal to. So any category here that is equal to any ID that is equal to this is going to, give you all IDs and stuff like that. So let's come back to our project. I'm going to open the terminal, and here we're going to have a query, and we're going to use star and square brackets. So we're going to query all type that is equal to category. So remember I said earlier in our CMS where we defined our schema category, we have this name over here. So this name category is what we are referencing here. Okay, so we have this our query. Now let's go on to execute. So we're going to have const categories is going to be equal to, and then we can await our client that we just imported. And now we need to call not like this, dot fetch, and this fetch we can pass a query. So we're going to pass our category query here, and next let's just log it to the console. So log it to the console, our categories. Remember I said getStaticProps runs on the server side. So this console.log, we should expect to see it over here in our terminal. So I'm going to save this, and it's going to fetch, and we have an error. So it expected a comma. So here we have an error. we added a full stop. So let's go to our client. So in our libs folder, Sanity, this should be a comma. So we fix this, and now we should see our category. So these are the two categories that we have. So top cities, and we also have programming languages. And we see the type. So we see that it has this underscore ref, slug, updated at. It has this type, description. It has created at, name. So this is way too much information that we need to reference on our front end. We also have this log, which is an object with this current and with the type. So what we can do is that in our query here, we can have an object where we can pick the different types that we need. So we can pick the name, we can also pick slug, and for slug, we only need current. Remember, our slug has this current and also type. And after our slug, we can also get image, we can also get the description, and then we can also query for underscore ID. So I'm going to save this, and if we take a look at our terminal once more, we don't see anything. Okay, we should see something. So let's go and save again. Okay, we don't see anything. So I'm just going to come and reload what we have over here. Come back to application, and next we see something. So we see we are only picking out the ID, the name, the slug, the image. So ID, name, slug, image, which is much more better as we had previously. So we have these categories. We are going to pass it as props to our component. So I'm going to take these categories here and add it as here. So this is going to be returned. So our props is going to be an object with a block content and also categories. So here we need to add this schema type for our categories in our next page. So we're going to say these categories is going to be an array of categories. So let's come to our models folder, and here we can add a category.ts file, and we can go on to export a type of category. Which is going to be an object equal to, and let's see for the category, we have a name. So here it's an object with a name, which is going to be a string. Category also has a slug. A slug is going to be an object that has a current, and this current property is also going to be a string. And we have an image, which is going to be of type string, like this. We also have, let's see, description and underscore ID. So we have description is going to be of type string, and next we have underscore ID, which is also going to be a string. So we can say this category is going to be an array of category. We import this from our models folder. So here we can get our categories as prop. We can log this to the console. So console.log these categories that we are going to receive. We can paste it here. And here, where we map through our categories, we can replace this rather than map through the static block categories we had. We are going to replace this with, where is it? With our categories, like this. And we're going to map. And now we get each category that we pass to our blog category cat. I'm going to save this. And if we come back to our project, we have an error. So cannot read properties of undefined reading map. And that's because our index.tsx line 19, we have categories to be undefined. Okay, so let's see. Over here, we have categories in our props. So what we can do, we can log our props to the console. Let's be sure that we are passing the categories as props. So let's log our props to the console. And here we just have this. So let's reload the page and let's see. We still get an error and we don't get any console.log. Okay, so we have an invalid source type prop. Okay. So we have this host name plus.unsplash.com is not configured under images. So I'm going to copy this and come back to our next config, and our next config we need to add that domain. Okay, so plus.unsplash.com. I'm going to save this and let's come back to our project and let's reload and see if we still get this error. So now we don't have an error. We can see in our array here we have our blog content and we have our categories. So these are the two categories that we wrote in our Next.js in our Sanity.io project. So it has an image, a title, top cities, a description, and the same thing over here. But if we click on these, we see that we go to /blog and then we go to this slug, which is not what we want over here. So let's quickly fix that. I'm going to take off this console.log, and here in our blog category card, if we visit that component, we can see that we're going to /blog and then /slug. Okay, and this slug we pass here is the name. So this should be, that's why we had this weird URL, because of the space that we had. So let's fix that. If we come back to this, the name is the name, image, description. For the slug, we know that it has a slug. So we're going to pass the slug here. We have an error because the slug, we need the current property again. That's the advantage of using TypeScript. So this should fix that. But in our blog category card, we want to go to not /blog /category /log. This is going to lead us to 404 page because we don't have any category page that we've defined in our pages over here. So it's fine. We go to 404. We'll fix this for later, but we have seen how we can query the data that we have in our Sanity.io. We write our query, we go on to fetch, and then we see how we pass it as props. So we're no longer using these dummy categories. We can get rid of it here. So this one improvement, if we come back to our project and we click on this, it takes us to a 404 page, which is fine. But we see that we go to /category and /slug. Same thing happens. Okay, maybe let's go on to reload the page. We have an error. What is the error? It should be a Next.js error. So what we can do, we can just clean up and run npm run dev again, and then we can reload our application. Let's see. Okay, so we have a warning that using Sanity client without specifying an API version is deprecated. I'm going to fix this in the next video, but we see that we have everything working fine and cool. So we go to /category programming languages, and we can go back and go to top cities. So it's been a long video. Let's come back in the next lecture and let's go on to replace this featured post and also this that we have over here. Let's go on and remove the warning that we had. So in the Sanity docs API versioning, you see over here that we have we can pass this API version. So I'm just going to take this API version that we have from the documentation, and if we come over to our lib, and in our lib where we have Sanity TS, I'm just going to pass this over here and save. Okay, so back in our index.tsx, let's go on and query next for, let's close this, for our different posts. Okay, our different blog posts. So here we have our, going to take this and also going to take this off. So now index.tx, let's also go on and have another query. So here we're going to have a const where we can have our blog query, and this is going to be equal to, and then we can have a type, and this type is going to be equal to equal to what? So let's come to our CMS, and in our schema we have this name blog. So the type has to be equal to that name blog, like this. And for fields, for one, I'm just going to take up everything so we see what we have and what we actually need. I'm going to log this to the console, but first we need to execute the query. Duplicate this and pass the blog query to this and call this blog or blog posts. So here we can come over and log the blog posts to the console. So let's save this and open up our terminal. So we get undefined expected token equal to, let's see if we missed something. Sorry, it needs to be double equal to, and then we save and let's see, we don't see anything. So we come back to the browser and we reload the page and we come back to our application. We get an empty array. We get an empty array. So let's be quite sure. So let's be quite sure, but because we created one blog post from previous class, so it's gonna reload again, come out to application. Yep, because here we need to specify underscore type. So we had a typo, so here it needs to be underscore type. So let's give it one last trial and reload. Okay, so this is it. We see our blog post. So we have the type, which is we don't need. So we are going to edit this our query like this. So we're going to need the description. We're also going to need, let's see, the title. We're going to need the category. We're not going to need the category. Okay. We are going to need the slug. And we see that the slug is also an object. And here we take current. And we are also going to need the image. And we are also, the image is an object. So image, and from the image we are going to take the URL property. And after the image we need the author. And author references is of type reference, and it just provides the ID. So we're going to leave this for later, and we can see how we can go on to, fetch this ID. So we can also go and pick is featured, and after it's featured we need the date, and after the date we need the underscore ID. So these are the properties that we would be needing. And what we can do, we can go on and pass this blog post that we're going to get as prop. So we're going to pass it here, and rather than pass this blog content, we're just going to take this off and we're going to pass the blog post instead. So here we're going to take the blog content, here the blog content. We already have this type blog, so let's see if it matches what we are querying. Image, title. So do we have a title? Let's see. Yes, we do. Image, title, description, author, and date. So we have image, title, description, image, title, description. There's no author, there's no date, there's no ID is featured, and slug. Let's add it. We're going to have an underscore ID, which is going to be string, is featured, which is going to be of type boolean, and we are also going to have an author. Okay, we have an author. We're going to have a slug, which is going to be an object, which is going to have a current, and then this current is going to be a string. So we can save this, and here we can map through the blog post. Okay, so here we can map through the blog post, we get each blog, and for slug, let's pass the slug. The slug is gonna be coming from our blog dot, not blog posts, sorry, not type. It's gonna be equal to our blog dot slug dot current, like this. We have an error because in the blog card we are not expecting a slug, so we can say we are going to have a slug type like this. So we can just paste this over here, and here we can go on to save. So the error should be gone. The error still stays, and it says type string is not to type. Okay, let's see. Here we have a slug which is not of type string. So we have a slug which is an object and which is of type string. So is it what we have in our block type of a slug, which is going to have of type object? So type string is not assignable to type. Oh, sorry, that means over here we just need to go with a type of string like this. So everything should be fine. And here we can destructure the slug, and we can wrap this. So everything, this is our card, we can wrap it with the link that comes from next link. And this link, the href, is now going to point to /blog, and then we have the slug here. So this is it. Let's go on and save. For author, I think author is undefined because we are not querying author here. So there's no author query, but let's go on and save, and let's come back to our application. We're going to reload. Let me open the terminal. And most of the time you just have to, quit your Next.js server and run it up again. And here we can, reload. And here we can see that we have our blog, and then the author is missing, but our image seems to be broken. Let's see what's breaking our image. If we come to our index, we have this image which is inside the URL object. So here we need to query our blog needs to be of type. So our image is going to be an object which has a URL type, which is going to be of type string. So we need to fix it here because we need to go to blog.image.url. And now this should fix the error that we had earlier. Okay, so we don't see. If we go on and reload the page, it's taking its time. Maybe we need to, quit our server and run npm run dev again. Come back to application and reload. Okay, so let's see. Here our image doesn't load. Okay, now it does load, and this is it. So we can click on this blog and we go to /blog/top programming languages. For now we still have dummy data over here, but we are making good progress. We have been able to replace the category, even though our category page doesn't exist for now, but that we would fix. And here, let's go on to replace the featured post and also have our post here. So in the next video, we are going to see how we can populate the author, because for now we just have blank over here, and go on to format the date that we have over here. So let's do this in the next video. In order for us to query for the author, I'm going to add the author here so that we can populate the author on our UI. And now we are sure that our blog post, if we log to the console, just so that we are sure, should now have so I'm going to save this and open the terminal. we get undefined. I'm just going to quit and run dev again. So let's see. And I'll just reload this. Object is not valid as a React. Okay, I think let's see first over here. Okay. And that's because we're passing the author here. So basically, I'm just going to edit this and pass an empty string so that we don't get that error. Okay, and then I would save. And let's see if our blog post here is going to return. So let's see if it's going to return our author. So we have here our author, which is an object with underscore ref and also the type. Okay, so now we're sure we're getting back our author. What we can do is to have another query. I'm just going to collapse all of these. So here we are going to loop. So we're going to have a for loop so that we can edit our author before we return it as JSX. Okay, so we're going to have a for loop, post of blog post, and inside this for loop we're going to do something like post.author. That means each individual post is going to be equal to, and we are going to have a function. So let's define a function over here, an async function, and let's call it getAuthor. And this function is going to receive the author ref. Okay, so this function is going to receive this author ref here, and this author ref is going to be an object with this underscore ref property, which is of type string. Okay, and here we can go on to write our function. So in here we are going to first of all form a query. So let's form a query, and this is going to be equal to, and here we can go with the GROQ query. So here we're going to have which underscore type that is equal to author, and then we have and, where the ID is going to be equal to, and then we're going to pass a param. So in order for us to pass a param, we're going to use this $, and here author ID. This author ID is going to be defined by us. You're going to see it in a second. It's going to give us an array. We take the first element, and from there we need the author name, we need the image, and then does an author have a description? Let's verify from our Sanity decks. So let's see the property that an author has. So an author has a name and an image. Okay, so we don't need to query for a description. Next, after the query, let's have the params, and these params we are going to inject inside our client fetch. So we're going to use this author ID over here. So here, and this author ID is going to be equal to the author ref dot underscore ref property. So the param is going to be this object where the author ref referencing this is going to be equal to what to receive. And now our author is going to be equal to, we await client, and then we call fetch, and fetch, the first argument is a query, which is the query that we just wrote up, and the second argument it can take is some query params, as you see over here, which is now the params that we're going to pass. And sanity.io, this query over here, is going to take this author ID and inject. So at the end of the day, we are going to have a situation whereby this author ID that we are getting here is going to be used to replace what we have here. So this is what the real query is going to look like, where the underscore ID is going to be equal to this. But then we are injecting it with this $, and it's going to take this value here rid of this underscore author ID and replace here. So that's what's going on. Now we have an author. We're going to go on to return author here, like this. So this getAuthor function, we're going to await it, call it, and we're going to pass the author ref, which is going to be equal to post dot let's see, post dot author. Okay, so the post that we get, and then we access this author property, which is an object, and here you see we have this underscore ref. Okay, so this is it. And if we go on to save, over here where we had to pass in a string, so where do we have, so over here where we had to pass an empty string, we can actually go on to pass our blog dot author here. But if we check our blog card, let's visit this component. Okay, we just need the author name and not the author image. So we're going to save this, and if we come back to the browser and let's see, so objects are not valid as a React child. So let's reload the page. Now it reloads and we still get an error. So objects are not valid as a React child. Found object with keys, name and image. So let's see. Let me open the browser and let's see where the error is coming from. It doesn't specify. Let's reload again and see. So we still get the error. So what we can do here, so for now I'm just going to go back to using an empty string like this. I guess everything should be fine now. So I'm going to refresh. Everything is fine and we don't see our author. But if I come back here and let me console.log each blog post. So console.log blog post here, and let's see what we have in the author property. So I'm going to save and open the terminal. So we have an author, which is an object with a name and also an image. Fine, so that's the error. So our author is going to be of type object with a name and an image property. So everything is fine. So we can come here, and here where we have our blog, we should update this. An author is going to have a name, which is of type string, and an image, which is also of type string. So this is it. I'm going to come here, and over here I'm just going to pass the blog dot author. Now we have an error in the blog card component, and that error is because the author here is not a string. Is also going to be, let's copy this type quickly from our blog TS. So I'm just going to quickly copy this type, and over here we can, in our blog card, we can update the type here. And once we update the type, we get an error because here we need to access the name property. So I'm going to save this as well. And if I come back to the application and I'm just going to reload, everything should be fine now. Yes, so everything is fine, and here we can see the author, which is my name. And for the date, we are just going to come to the blog card, and here we can just add this function, this format date function. So here we're going to pass the date. I'm going to create a new date from the JavaScript date class, and here we format the date and return the formatted date. So here where we pass date, we are going to call the format date function and pass in the date like this. So if we save this and we come back to the browser, we now have the date over here. So we have seen how we can come on and query for a blog post. So here we have this get author, just a brief recap. with this query. So we are first of all querying the type author, and we have this and here where the ID is equal to this author ID. It returns an array, so we take in the first element of that array, and then we strip out the name and also the image. For the params, you see how we can inject a param inside this query. We return the author, so that over here we use the JavaScript for loop to loop through the array and add this author property, which is the result of what we get from this function, and then we return. So that's it. And if we come back to application, next let's go on to query for the featured blog post so that we can have some dynamic data over here. Let's go on and query for our featured blog post. So over here I'm going to have another query which I'll call featured blog query, and this is going to be equal to this query where we have so we use star and then square brackets where the underscore type is equal to blog, and then where is featured is equal to true, like this. So we have this query. We are going to use the client. So over here we can have const featured post is going to be equal to await, and then we call clients dot fetch, and then we pass in the featured blog query. So let's log this to the console as always, and let's see what we have. I'm going to open the terminal, and we have this. Is it? Let me just reload to be sure. So I'm just going to reload the page, come back to the browser, and this is what we have. So we have this blog post over here, just this. So actually we have two. So we have one. So this was the first console.log, and the other was the second console.log. So we get back an array. So what we can do is we can take the first element of this query. Okay, it doesn't work like this. So here we can take the first element, which is this featured post. Okay, so now this is going to give us an object. I'm going to save again, and yes, so now we get back an object. So since we have an object, let's take out the properties that we need for our UI. And if we come back to our UI, we see that we just need an image, a title, description, and features. So we are going to, in our query, we're going to take underscore ID. We're also going to take image, which is an object. So in the object, we're going to take URL, and then we're also going to take what else? So image, that's the title and description. So we also need, let's see, description and title. So I don't get to see the title. Let's see. Yeah, so we have title, and we can also take description here. And are we missing anything? Nope. So let's also take the slug. So we also need the slug, and the slug is an object, so we can take current, and that should be it. Yes, so that should be it. Yeah, so we need the features as well, so we're going to take the features. So let's save this. We're going to take this featured post, so we're going to take it and pass it as props over here. So we can come over here and say we're going to receive the featured post, which is an object that is going to have these properties. So let's see what we have in our blog. So we have an image, title, description. It doesn't have an author, so it's going to have a date, underscore ID, is featured, and slug. I think it does have an author, so it does. So it's going to have all these properties, but we are not querying for all, I think we should go on and just, for the sake of simplicity, let's go on and also query for the author. So here, you can also query for the author. And now just split the screen so that we can see here. So the image, title, description, author, date. So here, you can also query the date. Underscore ID is featured. So we can also query it here like this in this log. So this is it for our query. I'm going to save this, and here we are going to say the featured post is going to be of type blog like this, so that over here where we have our featured post, the image is going to come from, so our source is no longer like this, it's going to come from, so let's go on and take the featured post from our props. So here we can take the featured post. So the image source is going to come from featured post dot image, and there we have dot URL. The alt is also going to come from featured post dot title. For the title here, same, so featured posts dot title. And for this description, we have featured posts dot description. And for these features over here, so let's see if we have features. We don't, so I'm going to add it here, features, and I'm going to make it optional. This is going to be an array of string like this, so we say string array. So that over here, I'm just going to cut, and I'm going to say featured post dot features, and then dot map. We get each feature, and then we're going to return a fragment where we add what we had before. So we don't actually need the fragment. I'm going to take it off. Let's see. Yep, missing key. So we're going to pass the key, and the key is going to be each feature like this. So let's go on and save, and rather than have feature 1 here, we're going to have the feature here. So we save this. Let's go back to application, and we have an error because cannot read properties of undefined reading image in line 59. Okay, the error is gone. And yeah, so this is our featured blog post image. This is the title, the description, and this is the list of features. So let's go on and actually trim the description because it's quite long. So here where we have the description, we can call the slice and take the first maybe 150 characters and just add a dot dot dot. So save this, come back, and now we just have this. So this is it, and we have seen how we can fetch queries. We have also seen how we can inject params in our query, and we have seen how to query for a specific item. So we are through with our landing page, our blog landing page. So up next, we can now go on and fix the category page, and after fixing the category page, we can also go on and fix the blog page. So here, let's go on and fetch the accurate data for the blog page. And in this, we still have much more to learn about Next.js because we have this log and we need to fetch the data for this slug page and render on our front end. So let's continue learning about Next.js. Let's go on and fetch the data for our blog details page. And for that, I am back to the official documentation of Next.js. And in the data fetching section, where we have getStaticPath, over here, we are going to be using getStaticPath because we want to go on and fetch the details for a particular blog post. Okay, and here in the getStaticPath section, if a page that has a dynamic route, and by dynamic route, we mean this slug page over here. So in our blog and this slug page, this is a dynamic route. So if a page is making use of such route, it needs to define a list. So a list, it means an array of paths that can be statically generated. Okay, so when we export a function getStaticPath from a page that uses dynamic routes, so Nextjs will statically pre-render all the path that is being specified by getStaticPath. So we need beforehand to tell Nextjs the different paths that we have in our application for our dynamic routes. And you see here that it's hard-coded and it's been passed to this path property. So in getStaticPath, we have this pass property, an object is being returned that has this pass property and fallback false. Okay, what fallback false means is that any request for paths that are not pre-generated by Next.js during build time is going to result in a 404 error. So this means that the page for the requested path does not exist, and Next.js cannot go ahead to generate that page on the fly. So in that case, you're going to have a 404 page. And you see that getStaticPath requires that we use getStaticProps. So it is mandatory that we use getStaticProps and not getServerSideProps. Okay, and if you come below, you would see the API reference for getStaticPath so that you can see all the props that can be used with getStaticPath. So over here, you can see the getStaticPath, and here, if you scroll below, you would also see that the fallback section, so this fallback false, it explains what I just explained earlier, that any paths that are not returned by getStaticPath will result in a 404 page. And you also can pass fallback true, so you can go on to read about it. And then we also have fallback blocking. Okay, so let's come to application and see how we can make use of getStaticPath in our Slug page. So below here, I'm going to export a const called getStaticPath. So this function. So first, this is an async function like this. So here, let's go on and generate our slug. So our slugs is going to be equal to await client, and then we please do go on to import client from the lib folder. So client.fetch, and fetch needs a query. So I'm just going to type in the query here. It says super short query, and then we're going to query that the type is equal to blog, like this. Okay, and this is going to give us we need to access the slug from this. So this is going to give us all blogs. So to access the slug, we just go with .slug, and we know that this slug has the current property on it. So this is going to give us the slugs, and here we need to return an object. So we're going to return an object that has path property. So this path property, we need to go on and return a params object, because as we saw in the documentation, the path property needs a params object. So what we're going to do here, let's transform these logs that we have. So here I'm going to have path, and this is going to be equal to slugs.map, and then we get each slug, which is going to be of type string. and then we are going to return. So this is return an object that has params, and this params is also going to be an object that's referencing the slugs that we have, so which is this slug here. Okay, so this path, we are going to pass it here, and then we're going to add fallback false. So this one, get static path, and now we are having this path, which is an array of this map returns an array. So we're going to have an array of objects that contains individual slugs that we have for our blog post. So after get static path, we can also go on to export. Now this is the time where we go ahead to fetch the data about the particular blog post. So we're going to export a const getStaticProps, which is going to be equal to an async function. This function is going to take the context. For now, we can just say type any. And inside here, so you can either use the function keyword or you can go on to use an arrow function. Okay, so inside here, let's first of all have access to the params object. And this params object is going to be coming from context like this. So from context, we can go on and destructure params. And then we know that the params object is going to contain slug because we named our page slug here. So we can go on to destructure slug from params. Okay, so now we have the structure slug. Let's go on and write our query. So we can have blog post, const blog post is going to be equal to await, and then we call our client, and client we call fetch. Fetch needs a query. So here, let's have a const, and let's call this query. It's going to be equal to, and then we're going to query any type, so underscore type that is equal to blog, like this, and where the slug dot current is equal to, and then we need to inject slug is equal to slug like this. This is going to give us an array, so we're going to take the first property from the array, and from this we can go on to the structure or to pick out the properties that we need from this query. Okay, so we're going to take the ID, we're going to take also the title, we're also going to need the description, the date, and then image. For image, we are going to need the URL, okay, as we have seen previously, and then we need the author. And we know this author is just going to give us the reference ID of the particular author. So we want to populate this author beforehand. And another way we can do this, that differs from what we did earlier here, is we can come to this log and do something like this. So we can tell it to populate the name and also the image like this of the author. So after this, the next thing we're going to go take is, let's see, is featured, and we also need a slug. And from slug, we can take the current property. Alright, so this is one, so we can pass this query over here. And remember that this query has a param, which is this. So the next argument is going to be the param. And next is a query param, which has to be an object. So we're going to pass the slug like this here. Okay, and next, remember we are in a getStaticProps function. We should go on and return the props that will be needed in the component. So here we can return props, which is an object, and we pass blog post. Okay, so let's go on and console.log blog post to be sure that we are doing everything fine. So I'm just going to open up the terminal, and I would save this. So let's see. So let's go send a request back to our project. I'm just going to reload and coming over to our blog page. So I'll click on this and go back to our application. And here we see the blog post. So we see the date, the image with the URL property. We see the author, and the author already has the name and image populated, and we see the different properties that we need. So we are sure that we have this property now, and we are going to pass it as props to this blog item page. So here we are going to pass the next page type. So we need to import it from next. And next page is a generic type where we can configure the props. So we can have an interface for blog item like this. Is going to be an object. We can call this blog item props. And then we're going to pass this over here as a props, okay? And then let's go on and define the type that we'll be using here. So it needs, so we're going to take date, which is going to be of type string. We're also going to take image. I'm also going to take image, and image is going to be an object that has a URL property, which is also going to be a string. And then we're going to have author, which is an object. I think this type already match the type that we have. So it already matches the type that we have here. So we can say this is going to, let's have this. So we can just say here blog post like this. And this is going to be of type blog coming from our models folder. Okay. So in our props, let's go on and destructure blog post like this. So here we can destructure blog post, and let's log it to the console. So if we save this and let's come back to our browser, we see an object that has these different fields. So the author, the date, the description, the image, and all these properties. So what we can do now, we are sure that we are having the right props. We can change the title and the description of this page. So over here, we can, I'm just going to collapse this. So over here, we can have the title, which is blog post dot title. Here we can have a short description. So blog post dot description, and then let's slice and take let's take the first 100. For author, for the source, we can go on to take this, have the blog post dot author dot image, and for the alt, we're going to have the blog post dot author and then dot name, and then we're also going to have the same thing over here. So I'm going to save this, and if we come back to the application, so we have the title, the description, we have the name, we have the author image, and here let's continue. So over here we can have the blog post image. So the blog post dot image, and here so dot image dot URL. So over here we can also have the blog post dot title, and for this same. We can have the blog post title. And for date, we are going to take the date function that we have here. Let's see. So this format date. So you can move this to a utility function or folder. For now, I'll just copy and paste here. So for date, we are going to use this. So the blog post dot date, and we are going to call it inside the format date method like this. And for this, we're going to have the blog post dot description. Okay, so let's see over here. We have more reads, we have some dummy text, and here we then have the categories. So we just fetch some dummy categories. So I'm going to save this, and let's see over here. So we have successfully replaced the data. If we come back to the application, so we see that we are now dynamically fetching the data that we need in our blog details page using getServerSideProps and also getStaticProps. Then we have this more section. So we just have here some dummy data, which can be categories. So you can go on to fetch the categories, and just display the content over here. So that's it for this page. If we come back to our blog, you see now that we have this dummy blog. We have this as our featured blog post. We have just one blog post, so we can definitely come back to our Sanity Studio and create another blog post. So here we can just quickly create another blog post. So the title, I'm going to call it JavaScript. For description, I'm just going to copy some Lorem Ipsum text. So just going to copy this and use here. For image URL, I'll come over to Unsplash and I'll just copy image address, and we use in our application. It's not going to be featured. For dates, I'm just going to pick this current date. For features, I'm just going to add top rated. For slug, we can go on to generate the slug. For category, let's pick programming languages. And for author, let's also go on and pick myself. So that's it, and let's click on publish. Then let's come back to our page and let's reload. We don't see the blog post, so I'm just going to come here to our index. Let's quit our server and let's start it up again, and then let's scroll down, and now we see our new blog post. So if we click on this blog post, this takes us to the blog details page. You can see that now we have the details of this page successfully fetched and rendered on our user interface. So that is it about getStaticProps. Coming back to our blog page, we have everything completed, all but this category section, which leads us to 404. So that is it. We have successfully fetched the top rated programming languages, the categories that we have, and we have also been able to go on and fetch our blog details. So our blog, and going to the blog details page. So to avoid going to 404 whenever we click on the category page, what will happen? I will just come back to the IDE, and here in our category card, so over here, then we have the link that goes to /category. I'm just going to take off the next link here, and then I'll save this. So back to application, it's no longer clickable, and we just list out the different categories that we have, the featured post, and also the blog details. So that is it, guys, and let's continue and let's go on to deploy our application. Before we go on to deploy our application, I'm going to close all tabs. Let's go on and add some environment variables. So I'm going to quit our Next.js development server, and if we come to the libs folder, we see that we had coded the ID in here. So at our root folder, that's the root of our front end. So our front end, our source, we have our lib folder here. I'm going to create a new file, and I'll call it .env.local. Okay, and here, so come to the libs, sanity. We're going to copy this project ID, and here we can call it sanity project ID, and it's equal to the string, so that we can copy over here and we can use it in here. So in here we're going to have it as process.env and then .sanity project ID. I'm going to save this, and if we open our terminal and start back our development server, let's go back to our application and let's reload to be sure that everything still works as intended. And yes, everything still works fine. We are able to fetch the data that we have from our Sanity project. So that is all for this lecture. Let's come back and let's deploy our Sanity project and also our Next.js project. To go on and deploy our Next.js application, we need to come over to vercel.com and create an account. So come over to vercel.com and do sign up, and you'll be prompted with some questions. So you can just go on and answer the questions over here, vercel.com, and then you need to connect with the provider. So you can either use GitHub or you can continue with email. In my case, I am going to continue with GitHub. And now this is going to ask that we sign into GitHub. So I'll go on and authenticate myself, and I'll be back once I'm done. So once you authenticate yourself, you're going to be redirected back to Vercel, and this is your Vercel dashboard. So this is your Vercel dashboard, and over here you would need to go on and import a Git repository. So in order for you to import a Git repository, you should have your project already on GitHub. So to have a project on GitHub, I'm going to come over to this plus icon. I am in my GitHub repository. Click here and have a new repository. So I'm going to give this a name of Nextjs Sanity Studio. So I'll go on and create a repository. So this is going to create a GitHub repository, and then we're going to push an existing repository from the command line. So we need to add this remote origin here. Then I'll come back to the project. In this project, first we need to initialize Git by using git init. And if we see over here, we have these 30 pending changes. And then let's go on to configure our name. And also let's go on to configure our email. So once we're done with email, let's also go on and add everything, our changes to staging. So we go with git add dot, and then we can go on to commit our changes, git commit -m to type a message, and then we can say final build like this. And after this, let's go on to push our changes to the remote repository. But first, we need to paste in that command. So git remote add origin. I'm going to execute. And now we can say git push origin master. And now we have our changes, our code on GitHub. So come over to GitHub, and if we reload this page, you see that our source code has now been added to GitHub. Now let's go on back to Vercel and host our application. In order for us to have our project hosted on Vercel, we need to search over here. And to search, I am just going to copy this name over here. So Next.js Sanity Studio, and we can search. So after this, it doesn't see the result. That means we need to configure GitHub app. I'm going to click on this link. Okay, and we need to give it the repository access. So only selected repository. I'm going to click on this drop down and add the repository. So which is this Next.js Sanity Studio. I'm going to click on save. It's been installed successfully. The window doesn't close, but we can come back to our project and reload our Vercel. So we can search for the repository again. We see the repository. You can go on to click on import. This is the project name. And then we also need to add some environment variables. I'll click here. And for now in our project, we have just one environment variable, which goes by this name. So we can add this here. And for the value, we can come over here. And here in our .env.local, we can copy this value and paste. So you can go on to click on add. Okay, so it's been added, and click on deploy. So now Vercel is going to go on and deploy our application. You can see that application at first is building. It's going to clone the GitHub repository, and then it's going to install dependencies after running Vercel build. And once our project is done building, we are going to have our finished project live on the internet. So I'm just going to fast forward through and give it some time to build. And over here we see that the deployment has been completed. And over here, if we click on dashboard, we can see this project over here. So if we click on this our project, we see that our project was successfully deployed, and we can go on to click here, and let's see view domain, and we can go on to edit this domain. So we can change it to Next.js sanityvercel.app. Let's see if this domain is available. You can click on save. Okay, it's assigned to another project, so we can go on and give this next sanity build. So let's save. Nope. Let's go and give it next sanity blog. Let's see if this is available. It's not available. And I'll just add my name. So next sanity lari, and this should be available. Yes, it is. And you can go on and visit the URL. You can come over to the blog section, and this is our project live on the internet. You can go on and visit a particular blog post, and we see everything that we've been working on. We see the file-based routing and everything in action over here. So this is our project, and we have seen how to deploy in Vercel, how to connect our project to a GitHub repository, and you have seen the exciting features that comes with Next.js. We have seen how to connect it to a CMS, in this case Sanity.io. We have seen how to use TypeScript in our Next.js project. We have seen how to route between pages in our Next.js project. We have also seen how to dynamically fetch data using getStaticProps, also using getStaticPath in our Next.js project. So this is Next.js, and these are the awesome features that comes with Next.js.